The story begins with a grand castle, seemingly rising to the heavens themselves. The sun illuminated the vast green expanse. The man who was sitting in the chair told the girl who was kneeling before him that they had decided to recognize her merits in inventing the elixir of immortality, which prevents aging and death. She was the best doctor in the empire, and her name was Heck Bu. Clenching her fists and lowering her head, with tears in her eyes, she said that it had finally happened. How many times had she suffered and fallen to find herself in this place? All this hellish suffering had finally ended. His Highness asked the girl if she had brought it. Heck Bu, bowing again before the man, replied that of course she had. The man standing behind her addressed the doctor. He asked her family to consider it an honor that the medicine would be tested on the most noble body. The girls stood nearby and whispered to each other. One of them told the other that he was talking to an ordinary Easterner about family. Didn't she just abandon her family and move far away? She even heard that this vile family had gone completely bankrupt. Hyuk Bu heard what they were talking about and thought, let those damn haters of the East talk whatever they want. The Empire's treasure is in a small chest, but it is simply priceless, and she needs only it. His Majesty turned to the doctor again and told her that she had said she wanted to make a wish in exchange for the invention of the elixir of immortality. The girl replied that she remembered this. Then the man asked what they should do. Unfortunately, they couldn't promise to fulfill this wish. Heck Bu, very upset, asked what he meant, and a guy with a sharp long sword was already behind her. His Majesty said that when he thought it all over, he became uneasy. If he had allowed her to live, wouldn't she have been able to concoct the elixir of immortality for someone else? Heck Bu, with sadness in her eyes and blood on her lips, thought about how she'd let her guard down. Even if she'd sworn otherwise, would he have been able to trust her? Don't even think about looking for living water. He knows that pure living water is essential for its healing properties. Even the greatest physician of the East is powerless against a surprise attack. He knew this from the moment the little Easterner began to talk about his desires, unaware of his place. Suddenly, the girl turned to His Highness and asked him to take care of his hair. He was surprised by such a statement and angrily asked what she meant. Hyuk Bu explained that he secretly commissioned her to make a cure for hair loss. His heart is so dark that even his hair is falling out. His Majesty asked his entourage not to look at him like that. They all immediately stared at his hair. He exclaimed that he had no problems, and the girl said he would soon go completely bald. Moreover, yesterday she secretly met with the Three Kingdoms, and they were all interested in this elixir. Since she announced that she would represent him to the imperial family, she is unsure what action they will take when they learn that she has been killed. His Majesty became even more angry and asked not to tell him about this, because in this case, there would be a war. He started calling the girl names and, gritting his teeth, cast a contemptuous, malicious glance at her. It seemed this body had reached its limit. She thought that if she became a brilliant genius, things would be different. Perhaps she couldn't cope alone, and if only she weren't alone. If there were people willing to watch her back, then maybe everything would be different. Most likely, this life is no good either. Hyuk Bu waved goodbye to everyone and said that she hoped they would all receive retribution for their actions. Before she died, the girl laughed and told His Majesty that the elixir was fake. It was dark in the room when the little girl suddenly woke up. She clutched the blanket and exclaimed that she'd failed again. Was she really going to have to live another 20 years? All because she'd ended up in her friend's favorite novel. Her friend, who loved stories about raising children, was willing to talk about the novel until her ears began to hurt. She talked about how stories about raising children were the best. One day, she woke up and found herself in that very novel, but she couldn't understand why she was in it and not her friend. The title of this novel about raising children in the Eastern style was quite intriguing. It was called The Local Doctor is Also an Excellent Cook. This is a story about Heck Ayan, who has the ability to heal people with the help of cooking and various delicacies. This girl heals many people with her talent, and it's simply amazing. People admire her dishes when they try them. In the end, she even cures her father of the incurable, terrible disease that had been eating away at his entire life. In fact, the main character's ability had one big secret. Someone coughed nearby, and she immediately glanced straight ahead. There was a guy standing in front of a board with chalk in his hands who asked her to concentrate and not get distracted. She was already tired of coming back here every time. Before her again were these rooms, and a boy with chalk in his hands in front of a blank board. She understands that she ends up here when she first entered this body. But why does she return to the age of 3 every time she dies? The boy said he gathered them to see if they could inherit the family's power. Those who demonstrate exceptional abilities will receive an advantage from the main house. Then, before the lesson begins, he asks for a brief history review. The continent on which they live is divided into eastern and western parts. The eastern continent worships the sky, wind, and water. These three elements bring joy to people and they pray to them incessantly, while the western continent worships earth and fire, also the greatest elements. The ancestors of their great Hek family were mysterious people who crossed into the eastern continent, where they worshiped the sky and nature, protected by dragons, and reached as far as the western continent. The people of the western continent received the dragon's blessing and were able to use abilities related to nature. These abilities include water, wind, light, plants, and so on. However, the most outstanding ability is the exceptional healing ability. The first head of the Hyuk Ahwa family, with the help of this ability, healed the emperor and eliminated the plague, which is why she received the title. Then, settling here in the Baiho Empire, she founded the Hek family, a lineage of pharmacists and doctors, such as their family's long and proud history. Every time he says it's a history lesson, he's actually just brainwashing them with ideology. The guy said they were about to begin the test. He asked them to concentrate on the things in front of them. A mug of water, a fan, there. The kids can choose what they like. The girl thought about how they finally got clean water. Using these objects, they must cure the patients assigned to them. The girl listened attentively to the teacher. In front of them on the floor lay people who were covered with black blankets. The teacher explained that they were all patients brought in from the slums. One of the boys suddenly started crying and telling his mother he wanted to go home. Another boy called his dad and said that he was really scared of him. The girl looked closely at one of the patients, who was breathing very heavily and was unconscious. She noticed that he was in severe pain and had severe bed sores and a strong odor from the pus. The girl thought that they were looking for doctors, but still forced children to serve patients. What did children and people do to deserve this? She thought she was very tired of this family of scoundrels. Next to her was a girl. Suddenly, she turned towards the girl and asked her to sit down immediately, because she couldn't get up now. She just had to finish this test. And the woman kept asking the girl to quickly sit down in her seat, but her gaze changed dramatically when everything around was in water, and the girl began to pour water from all the vessels. Her name is Hek Bu, and she is the real cousin of the main character. She is a hidden genius and a pharmacist. Her friend told her about Hyuk Bu. This girl has outstanding talent and a pleasant appearance, but it's such a pity that the little girl died so young, like a beautiful butterfly. But when she first woke up in this body, she was sure she would survive. But now, the girl couldn't understand why. Then it dawned on her that it was all because she knew the novel cover to cover. Thanks to her friend, she remembered everything, whether she wanted to or not. And in all three lives, she died a shocking death. In her first life, she demonstrated her talent earlier than anyone else. But without support, she was used as a slave within the family and died at the hands of a psychotic patient. In her second life, believing that excess of anything is poison, she hid her talent and tried to live modestly. But she died, falling off a cliff with a patient who was exhibiting symptoms of delirium when she tried to stop him. In her third life, the girl spread her arms out to the sides and cried out that she could not stand this any longer. She no longer cares about the original story, nor does she even care whether she needs this terrible family. In the Imperial Palace, there is a treasure that grants wishes. The girl had one goal: to get to him and get to her real world as quickly as possible. She successfully became the best doctor in the Empire, but she died again because of the Crown Prince. The girl held vessels of water in her hands, and streams of water began to splash in all directions. It was through this that she realized something. No matter how many migrants there are from the Eastern continent, the Empire is permeated with hatred and discrimination against the inhabitants of this part of the continent. She can't handle this alone, and she needs her strength. She absolutely needs the strength of her family, the Hek family. She already knows the disease of these patients, and it is called epidemic fever. This is the 4th time she's seen her, so there's no need to even run a diagnostic. To make the medicine, this root and dried herbs must be mixed. The girl immediately began using her abilities to mix the ingredients. The patients began to come to and open their eyes. Some of them had already risen slightly after regaining consciousness. They could not understand what had happened to them and peered into the room in which they had been lying for so long. The woman who rose to her feet joyfully exclaimed that she was cured, and all her wounds were healed. Another man said that his return to normal was simply a miracle. Hek Bu turned to the woman and asked if that was enough. She was simply shocked and sat down on the floor in surprise, looking at the girl. The woman asked her to wait a minute. As the girl was leaving, she called her by name, and she turned in her direction. Hek Bu was already outside, walking across the playground. She was on a hill, and looking at the city that spread out before her, she exclaimed that this place was simply enormous. She couldn't understand why the estate was the size of an entire village, and it was simply unbelievable. It was quite tiring to navigate it in a child's body. Her grandmother and current head of the Hek family, Hek Moran, had 5 sons and 3 daughters. However, 1 son and 1 daughter have died, and another son is missing. One of these sons is her father, and the other one is the father of the main character, Hyuk Ah Yang. When 3 sons, renowned as great warriors, fell ill with incurable illnesses, it seemed like a curse. The Hek family began to decline. The woman said the family needed a genius to lead it. That's why they constantly conduct tests in hopes of finding talent, and they recruit everyone, children of collateral families, illegitimate children, and those living in prison like her. But no matter how outstanding a person's performance is in the exam, it is impossible to attract the attention of the head of the family. The aunts, who have seized control of the family behind the scenes, secretly block information to eliminate competition for their own children. The same thing happened in her past life, and there's no point in going down the difficult path again. Better to surrender to the flow of the original story once again. The girl kept thinking about how Hyuk Ah Yan was only 2 years old now. She realized Hyuk couldn't help her in any way. Then she had to continue and pave her own way. And the girl took her first step. On the path where the main character shines, she will remove some obstacles, scatter a few flowers, and quickly establish her as the head of the family. Then she will have the opportunity to enter the imperial palace again. And then she will obtain the treasure, after which she will return to her original world. The girl thought about what she would do first, and decided that she needed to find him. Suddenly her gaze changed, and without expecting it, she flew over the man who was lying on the floor, tripping over him. Hyuk Bi-yu immediately stood up and grabbed her nose, which she had hit. Then she looked at the man lying on the floor. She realized that the youngest of the 3 brothers locked in the East Wing was now standing before her. The protagonist's father and her uncle, Hyuk Bi-ran. The girl immediately came closer to him and began to look closely to understand what state he was currently in. She began to call her uncle louder and louder and asked him to get up. Hyuk Bi-yu tried for a long time to wake up her uncle, but he did not respond at all, and now her arm hurts after she hit him to wake him up. It turned out to be more serious than she thought. The reason her uncle suddenly fell asleep in the middle of the aisle was because he simply likes to sleep on the floor. The disease is so severe that normal daily life is impossible. This condition is called narcolepsy and sleepwalking. This is her first patient's incurable disease, and it is really very serious. The girl thought that in order to avoid a reaction when she hit him so hard, it was necessary to use other actions. Hyuk Bi-yu looked closely at her hands and wondered how much they hurt. Was this boy really made of steel? She looked at her palms again and couldn't understand why this had happened to her. What's up with this man? It's like he really is some kind of Iron Man, or maybe a monster. Well, about the monster, that was a joke, of course. Near the girl was a bowl of living water, and next to it, a large silver bottle. Hyuk Bi-yu turned her head to the side. The girl thought that she should first take care of herself and began to put her hand into the bowl of water. After she did this, she raised her hand up and transparent streams of water began to emerge from the vessel, rising higher and higher. This was the first ability of the girl doctor, and she thought that she could heal herself with water, and this was very good because the wounds on her hands had already healed. When she put her hands out and looked at them, there was no longer a single red mark, only water flowing down them. But only if the water is especially pure. And that's very good. It's a shame she can't heal other people this way. But that doesn't matter when she has her second ability. The girl looked closely at the man lying on the floor and decided that it was much more important to figure out how to wake up her uncle. It looks like he won't wake up without a fight, but she's not going to go down without a fight. This is her 4th life, and she can't afford to waste a single day. Hyuk Bi-yu thought for a long time about what to do and decided to use all her strength to hit her uncle with her fist. She again asked him to wake up quickly, but realized after hitting him several times with all her strength that even that didn't work. When the girl tried to hit him again, the man suddenly grabbed her by the hand with which she had hit. The girl didn't expect this and, flipping over in the air, began to fall. She was, of course, a little frightened and clenched her fists. The man, looking at the girl, thought that this was the first time something like this had happened to him. He had never seen such an attempt on his life. The boy lifted the girl as high as he could above his head and asked the little girl who she was. Meanwhile, different people were sitting at the table, and the guy told the girl that she was just a real princess. This was clearly a malicious mouth, and the boy looked at the girl and asked if she wanted to die now. He lifted her above his head again, and Hyuk Bi-yu clenched her fists again, a little angry at him because he was holding her by the scruff of her neck. The girl closed her eyes and said she couldn't breathe. She tried to tell her uncle it was her, Hyuk Bi-yu, and called him a stinking piece of shit. Uncle was simply shocked and asked why she called him that. Could she really be his second brother's daughter and look exactly like her? After the boy let her go to the ground, she started coughing and said that she was only 3 years old, and was he serious about behaving like this? He increased her hatred of this affair by 20%. The boy unexpectedly called the girl a butterfly child. Hekbiyu was surprised and looked questioningly at the boy, asking what butterfly he was talking about. What the hell is this nonsense about a butterfly? Her friend and her uncle keep calling her a butterfly for some reason, and how is she even connected to them? She had never heard anything like it. And standing opposite her uncle, she asked why he was sleeping on the floor in the hallway. The boy replied that it was because of the nice weather. Hyukbiyu called him a liar in response. He can't even eat properly because of narcolepsy. Moreover, his sleepwalking became so severe that he sent his own daughter to the West Wing, while he locked himself in the East Wing. Unlike the West Wing, which contains the main building and key administrative offices, the abandoned East Wing is inhabited only by those who have been exiled. It is there that the 3 sons of the great leader live, suffering from incurable diseases. He and her cousin, who stood next to the girl and looked off into the distance. Of the 3 sick people, only 1 will be cured by Hekayan in 10 years. The remaining 2, not including her father, will die before then. But of course, there's still some time. The girl thought about this, because this was the whole problem, and she grimaced and crossed her arms over her chest. She can't wait 10 years. She needs to get to the Empire's treasure as soon as possible. So she asks her uncle to join forces, since their goals coincide. The girl approached her uncle and asked him to listen. She only wanted to tell him this extraordinary secret. In fact, she is a genius, and the dream must believe it, since she speaks the truth. The boy, of course, didn't believe her and turned around to ask if she was serious. He asked her to tell this nonsense to someone else. Then the girl asked if he would believe her if she could cure his illness. The boy didn't expect this and, looking at her in surprise, asked if she was serious. What did she just say, and could it be true? Hekbiyu smiled and replied that she could overcome an illness no one could cure. The girl continued to explain to the boy that she was a great genius in this regard, and he again looked at her in surprise. The boy exclaimed, grimacing strangely, that she had clearly lost her mind. That was exactly what was written on his face, but it was understandable. He's probably already seen a lot of doctors and pharmacists, but it would be a problem if he counted her among them. The girl looked at the boy and said that he would understand everything himself when he experienced it himself, and he asked what exactly. Hekbiyu held a small vessel in her hands, from which water began to splash out in a stormy stream. She began to rise upward, splashing in different directions and approaching the boy, enveloping him completely. He didn't expect this and, frightened, asked what was happening. He couldn't understand what she was doing to him right now. The girl continued to smile and direct the stream of water toward him, suggesting that she would show him her second ability, which allowed her to become the Empire's greatest doctor in her 3rd life. The boy started coughing really badly, and the girl asked him not to talk during the examination. She asked if he'd done this before, and even an uncle should be familiar with water. He was a water user, so the boy asked her what nonsense she was talking about. When he looked at her arm, he saw a bruise. When he woke up, he misjudged his strength because he thought the girl was a killer. His uncle grabbed her hand at that moment and hurt her. The boy remembered that moment and felt sorry for her, because at that moment, he did not understand who was in front of him. Hyukbiyu continued to play with the water, which splashed everywhere. The boy thought about how this girl had withstood his strength when he took her hand and didn't even scream. She continued to spray streams of water at her uncle. It was too much, and how many medicines did she need to feed him? Her second ability allows her to examine patients and prepare medicine using clear streams of water. If it is a condition she has already treated and has the necessary ingredients, she can prepare the medicine on the spot during the examination. And if it is an unknown disease, she can determine the necessary ingredients and combinations through diagnostics. Having lived 3 lives, she has accumulated a vast database of illnesses. In short, she can cure many ailments at once. But Uncle's illness was very serious. It's no wonder the original novel called it incurable. She needed to give him more medicine than someone terminally ill would. Luckily, the initial cure is quite simple. Given time and the ingredients, she can cure him. The girl continued to direct the streams of water towards the boy, and he looked at his hand with a surprised look. He was simply shocked and couldn't understand what was happening. The girl exclaimed that his illness was too severe, but he covered his ears and said he didn't want to listen to her. Hyukbiyu asked why, since she was trying to make him feel better. It was strange to sleep anywhere, didn't he think so? The boy, clutching his head, said he just really liked to sleep and it wasn't a disease. If she had such an ability, she'd be better off in the main building than hanging around here. Hekbiyu decided this patient was very stubborn, but she was used to it by now. The girl approached the boy again and asked why he continued to deny it if he was actually sick. Can he even imagine how many patients she saw as a pharmacist and doctor? She had many, and she saw a wide variety of illnesses. They are all the same, and came full of confidence, and then left with nothing. The boy, still clutching his head with his hands because it was splitting and he wanted to sleep, said that he was indeed a patient. But he had no desire to hear his diagnosis. He kept repeating that he was tired of hearing that this damn disease could never be cured. The girl exclaimed that he would regret it if he didn't listen to her. The boy called her a problem child, and he had already told her he didn't want to listen. The girl chuckled in response and, looking at the boy, said that if he didn't want to, then he shouldn't listen. And he looked at her in surprise again. He asked why she had suddenly listened to him. Hyuk Biyu thought she would have liked him to side with her right away, but she hadn't expected it to work out that way the first time. My uncle has become very sensitive due to a long and serious illness, and it is enough just to see his face. The girl told her uncle that they would see each other again and was about to leave. The boy asked her to go to his father. Then he turned towards her and, pointing his finger at her forehead, asked her not to go to his older brother and not to complain about what he had done. Hyuk Biyu remained standing as the boy turned away from her and began to walk away. The girl began to count to 3 when her uncle began to stagger, and not even a few seconds had passed before he fell face down on the floor. She immediately approached him and thought about how her friend had said he looked like Sleeping Beauty. And surely Sleeping Beauty looks more like a stubborn uncle. Hyuk Biyu looked at her blue hand. She decided to let the bruise remain for a little while longer and take the medicine after all. She was standing next to her uncle and, looking at her hand, was thinking about something. Waking up brings not refreshment, but irritation and boredom. The boy wondered how much time had passed this time. He clutched his head with his hands and could not understand how long he had slept, and his head was splitting with pain, so he did not take his hands off it. His body, strengthened many times over compared to a normal person, thanks to the dragon's blessing, wouldn't die even if he fell asleep without eating. But that's all. His time was wasted like trash, and his ordinary, boring, everyday life flashed before his eyes. Then, memories of time spent with friends and even time with his only daughter flashed before his eyes. Even little Ah Yan, who was once a baby, could now call him Daddy. Hyuk Biyu climbed on top of her uncle and continued to wake him. She asked him to get up. As if he slept there, his face would twist. Suddenly, the boy woke up and called her a brat, glaring menacingly at the girl. She was glad he was awake, but turned away from him in fear. He asked the girl how she always found him in such places. Hyuk Biyu replied that she had lived there for many years, and he thought she couldn't find just one uncle. The boy grimaced and exclaimed that even his elders left him alone when he was sleeping. And this little thing had been coming for several days now. If it weren't for his second brother, he wouldn't have tolerated this. The boy stood on the path, surrounded by huge, beautiful cherry blossoms. It wasn't his fault, and the boy clenched his fist as he moved across the yard. The leaves of the beautiful blossoming tree fell on his head. Moreover, he remembered that bruise. She has the ability to heal, and she can't heal her own hand. The boy said that was fine, and asked what she wanted from him. Then the girl held out a bottle of some kind of medicine. He looked closely at the medicine that appeared before his eyes. She thought joyfully about having made it. Hyuk Biyu continued to hand him the bottle of her homemade medicine and asked the boy to take it. The uncle asked the girl if she was really asking him to take medicine from a doctor without a license or training. Hyuk Biyu replied that she was, and that she was asking him to at least take a sip. Then the boy asked if she was trying to poison him. The girl said, "Of course not. And why wouldn't he have drunk it if she had said it was poison?" The boy said that it was fine, and that he had no particular reason to live, so he asked her to give it to him. He added that he would gladly die for her. The girl thought, looking at the boy, that of course he was bluffing. Why would he die if his daughter was as cute as a rabbit? She asked her uncle if he really wanted to die, and what he was thinking about right now. She didn't expect him to be so stubborn and unbearable. Hyuk Biyu hugged the bottle of medicine and said that one shouldn't throw words around so easily, because everything in life materializes. They are, after all, a family of doctors, and they need to watch their words and actions. She looked at her uncle carefully, as if scolding him. The first manifestation of the disease occurred 12 years ago. It all began when he lost consciousness during a meeting in the main building. After that, there were times when he slept for 3 or even 5 days. Compared to that, he's awake for just over an hour, and the symptoms only get worse. Besides, if he doesn't eat properly, things will get worse even faster. Hyuk Biyu asked the boy about her diagnosis, so she asks him to take this medicine. Handing it back to her uncle, she explained that he had nothing to lose by trying it. He's probably worried because he's only seen charlatans before. But she's completely different, not like them. The girl again began to pull the bottle of medicine into the boy's hands and asked him, looking into his eyes, to believe her. She said she was good at healing people. Hyuk Biyu asked the young master to trust her. She smiled at the boy and said that her treatment was truly legendary. You just had to try it. Suddenly, the boy asked to give him this medicine and reached out his hand to the bottle, which surprised the girl very much. She couldn't understand what had come over him since she'd thought he'd stubbornly refused today. Uncle couldn't understand why she was wearing something her size, because she only had bottles that big. Then the boy took the bottle and asked the girl to promise that if he drank it, she would stop taking it out of his hands. Hekbiyu immediately promised this to her uncle and said that she was glad that there was an abandoned herb garden in the East Wing. She explained to the boy that with his help, she was able to quickly prepare this medicine, and he almost choked when he heard these words. The uncle got very angry, and when he had already finished drinking the medicine, he asked the girl what it tasted like and what she had put in it. She was pleased and surprised when he drank all the medicine. Hekbiyu called her uncle a good patient and asked if he wanted some candy. The boy asked her to forget about it and asked again if she had just tried to poison him. The girl thought that thanks to the dragon's blessing, the poison affected him less than ordinary people, and yet he still made such a fuss. Good medicine must taste bad. Hekbiyu, overjoyed that her uncle had taken the medicine, took the empty bottle and, bidding him farewell, ran off. The boy asked her where she had gone and asked her to come back and explain to him everything that had just happened. Hekbiyu was already back at her uncle's side and asked him to wake up immediately and take his medicine. She followed him everywhere, asking him to stop and just take this medicine. She continued this phrase every time she saw him. The boy was already tired of seeing this girl every time, and the pressure on him was increasing more and more. After he took the medicine, she offered him candy again, and he refused, catching his breath. Once the boy had taken his medicine, the girl said goodbye to him again, saying they'd see each other tomorrow and running away from him as quickly as possible. He wondered what the little brat was up to. Usually, when children ask adults for help, don't they ask to play or put them to bed? But this little girl is only interested in giving him his medicine, and besides, she never says anything about her father. The boy thought about this in surprise, because it was unlikely that his second brother would have taken care of her in such a serious condition. He clutched his head, beads of sweat breaking out, and sighed heavily again. The boy decided he had to forget about it. He's already got his hands full, so why should he even bother with anyone else? It's just that those bruises on her thin wrists just won't go away. He can't even refuse her because it makes him feel guilty. The boy couldn't understand why he wasn't sleepy even now, but he was constantly distracted, and his gaze fell somewhere into the distance, onto the green forest floor. He continued to move along the corridor, thinking that he wasn't sleepy at all, but he couldn't figure out one thing: how much time had passed. Has he really slept more than 2 hours lately? Today he opened his eyes at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was very surprising to him. It was now 5 o'clock. He kept thinking about this extraordinary little thing who had suddenly turned her head to the side. She couldn't figure out what it was and began peering into the forest thicket. The girl heard a noise and felt something strange. She couldn't tell if she was imagining it or if a small green twig appeared in front of her. As she'd thought, finding good ingredients in the East Wing garden alone was quite difficult. Since they are a family of healers, herb beds are scattered throughout the East Wing. But they have been neglected for so long that they are completely abandoned. It's barely enough for a second dose, but after that, she'll have to go to the market for other ingredients. Hekbiyu continued to think about what to do, because outside the old Hek family estate, there was the building she needed. If she goes outside, she will find one of the 3 largest herbal markets in the entire empire. The girl persisted and decided she would need a bodyguard to leave the estate. She wondered if her uncle would come with her. He seems to be staying awake longer, at least for now, but she's not sure he'll be able to go to the market with her. In any case, her uncle should have noticed the effects of the medicine by now. While she was thinking about this, he was already chasing across the green meadow like an enraged, angry elephant. He ran very quickly and called her Little One. The girl, seriously frightened, began to run away from him as fast as she could. She ran very quickly and couldn't understand why he was here. After all, if he caught her, she would be a corpse. He chased after her very quickly, asking why she kept running away. Hyukbiyu was completely covered in sweat, quickly moving her small legs. She screamed. Her uncle was constantly following her, and she was very scared. The boy, appearing in front of the girl, exclaimed that he wasn't following her. He was already right in front of her, and they suddenly collided. The uncle immediately lifted the girl as high as he could above his head. When she found herself so high, he said that this time he caught her without harming her, and was very glad about it. The boy continued to hold the girl in his arms, and she suddenly began coughing. When he asked what was wrong with her, she started coughing. The uncle released the girl onto the green grass and asked her how she was feeling. Hyukbiyu continued to cough and complain about the difficulty breathing from running. He knows she actually has a healthy body. After clearing her throat, the girl asked why he suddenly wanted to find her. Then the boy approached her and asked, smiling happily, what she was giving him. The girl was very happy because he really did discover that the medicine really works. She began to shout joyfully, talking about how she had finally won his trust. She had won the trust of not just anyone, but the main character's father. This was significant progress for the girl, and things would go much easier now. Hekbiyu, looking her uncle in the eye, exclaimed that she was very happy and had told him so, and now she asks permission to tell her story. She looked her uncle in the eye, smiling, but he suddenly staggered and fell. The boy had fallen over again and started snoring. She asked him if he was really making fun of her by falling asleep at such an inopportune moment. The girl clutched her head in her hands and exclaimed that everything had only become much more interesting. That day, BU's screams echoed throughout the East Wing. It was a most inopportune moment, and Uncle had fallen asleep at such a crucial moment. They say if you're unlucky, you can break your nose by falling backward. Now was the time to fall asleep, but the girl didn't give up and decided she had no choice. She wanted to go with her uncle, but it seemed she'd have to go alone. She'll have to go alone to the home of the eldest of the 3 imprisoned brothers. There's another patient there, living in the West Wing. The Western Wing of the main building is home to qualified doctors and pharmacists, and the warriors who protect them. And then there are her cousins, the head of the family, and her aunts. Someday, she'll have to surpass them all. Hekbiyu thought that in order to confront them, she must first take control of the East Wing. And to do that, she would need to make the isolated patients her allies. These 3 brothers were once the strongest warriors in the family, until they fell ill with a terrible, serious illness. If at least 2 of them take her side, that would be absolutely wonderful. Things would certainly become much easier and move faster. Hekbiyu suddenly clutched her head and screamed. She couldn't understand why she was bumping into things more often. The girl hit herself, grabbed her head with her hand, and opening one eye, asked the boy who appeared in front of her who he was. The boy stood opposite her and also looked at the girl in surprise, peering closely at her. Hyuk-bi-yu began to recall that tousled hair. The girl realized that this boy was her eldest uncle's son, and his name was Hyuk-ki-won. The girl ran up to the boy and, smiling, greeted him. She explained to her older brother that she was Hyuk-bi-yu. The girl asked the boy if he was K.M. Wonum's older brother. The boy was very surprised and asked how she knew his name. Hyuk-bi-yu replied that it was because they were cousins. His dad was her dad's older brother, and she had come here to meet him. The boy couldn't understand why, and asked if she really came here to meet him and why all of a sudden. He looked menacingly at the girl and asked her not to say only that she had come here to start a quarrel. She didn't expect this, and the boy kept asking if she'd come because her father was sick, and she wanted them to bond over caring for them. Hekbiyu noticed he wasn't mincing words, but it can't blame him, because those who care for the sick can be much more sensitive, especially someone who has been single-handedly caring for his father since he was 5. Her father was also very ill, but no, she didn't want to think about that right now. The boy said he had nothing to say to her and asked the girl to leave. Hekbiyu, when his older brother headed for the door, asked him to wait a bit, but the boy exclaimed that he was very busy and had no time to worry about her or her father. Her father's illness was entirely her problem. The girl remained alone outside the door, only watching the boy leave. Beads of sweat trickled down her face, and she thought, this guy is very cold-blooded. But she came to cure his father. The girl thought it didn't matter anymore, and she'd come a little later. However, she couldn't meet her uncle without Kiwan, because her uncle was too dangerous in his illness. When the girl looked at Kiwan, she decided he was truly loyal. Opposite him stood a boy with several of his comrades, who asked Kiwan if he was still taking care of the hopeless patient. They continued to mock the boy and ask if it was time for him to give in. Hekbiyu watched from the sidelines. One of the boys asked Kiwan if his father had been sick since he was born. He started twirling his finger near his temple and said that he was sick with something like this, which of course continued to insult the boy's father. Hyukbiyu realized that this was Hyukdaevi's eldest aunt's son. The girl smiled and said that she had met him again. The children of the Hek family have 2 possible paths. They either become doctors or pharmacists who treat people, or they become warriors who protect them. However, despite his lack of talent in both areas, this boy is different. Hyukdaewi took advantage of every opportunity given to him, relying on his mother's influence. The girl thought that especially during her 3rd life, it was especially terrible and unbearable. The girl looked into the distance and thought that she had realized that the 3rd time was strange on many fronts. It all started when the main character, Hyuk-ah-yang, suddenly disappeared, and the grandmother, the head of the family, died very early. After that, the eldest aunt, who had inherited the title of head, suddenly died too. Eventually, Hyuk-daewi, that nasty boy, became the head of the Hyuk family. Hyuk-bi-yu was asked if she really thought she'd achieve anything by leaving the family. The guy asked if she'd expected him to just sit and watch. She was just his toy. The family, led by this scoundrel, interfered in her life at every turn. Unable to bear it any longer, she even devised a plan to destroy the Hek family single-handedly. But the Hyuk family was destroyed by someone else. It was destroyed by her cousin, Hyuk-bi-won. In fact, Hyuk-ki-won was imprisoned very early for a brutal attack on Hyuk-daewi's gang. As a result, his uncle did not receive proper care and died quickly as his illness worsened. Later in the original novel, the main character consoled the grieving and regretful Hyuk-ki-won and eventually made him her ally. The girl kept thinking about how, in her 3rd life, Hek-ah-yan had suddenly disappeared. and everything had gone wrong from the very beginning. Back then, she was too busy trying to escape her family to worry about anything else. But there must be a reason why the story changed significantly the third time. She'd have to think about this carefully in this life. She continued to watch Kiwon, who told the naughty boy to stop teasing him and disappear immediately, but he didn't let up and asked to just look at that face. He asked if the boy wanted to hit him and asked him to try. He decided to see how crazy the son of a madman could be, and with this phrase, he finally angered Kiwon. Hyuk Bi-yu thought that leaving them would lead to disaster. She decided she needed to think of something quick. After all, in the event of a fight, it is absolutely clear that only Hyuk Ki-won, who has no support, will be punished. She can't let him go to jail again, and the girls started to get closer to the guys as quickly as possible. She was already there and, calling them idiots, asked them to wait for her, her future villainous older brother. His younger sister, the greatest doctor, was coming to save him. The girl was very angry and exclaimed that they were going to beat one boy as a whole crowd, and how was that even possible? The boys weren't expecting this and immediately glanced at the girl in surprise. She continued to say that if they beat him, she would tear them apart. The girl was showing side effects from running at full speed and was completely covered in sweat. Hek-ayan asked what was wrong with the little one. The girl standing nearby said she didn't know her. She is the daughter of Mr. Hek Bi-hu, one of the 3 brothers imprisoned in the East Wing. She heard that he once married a woman with purple hair. The naughty boy, when he heard this story, immediately turned towards her and asked if it was really true. It seems that today, all the children of the sick people gathered, and they continued to look at the girl who appeared so unexpectedly. Hyuk Ki-won looked at her and asked her to leave, as it was very dangerous here. The boy said he could handle it himself. The girl said, as he was about to leave, that she thought so. Her brother was kind, no matter how he pretended. Hek Bi-yu took the boy's hand and said she had a wonderful plan. Then her brother asked what she meant. The girl explained that she had decided to use this plan, but she asked him to close his mouth and move away. Hek Bi-yu said she'd count to 3, and already started counting. She hid her hand behind her back, holding some berries. Opposite her stood this scoundrel boy, and when she counted to 3, she threw in their direction what was in her hand. They started asking what it was. Hek Bi-yu thought about how, when she asked him to move away, he did just that. When did he even have time to run away so fast? It's so great to have an assistant who picks things up so quickly. Meanwhile, Hyuk Dae-vi continued to cough and asked his comrades not to panic. The girl said they were just berries from the berries of the wattle tree. And so, her little brother wasn't so clueless. That's right, these berries are used as the base for smoke bombs. The girl silently called them idiots. She was sure they didn't know about it and continued to fiddle with the branch with the red berries. The boys were completely enveloped in smoke, and the light was somehow strange. If you add the juice from the stems to the mixture, you'll definitely get toxic smoke. The boys started writhing and complaining of stomach pains. Hyuk Dae-vi became very angry and asked the girl what she had done, looking at her with a contemptuous gaze. The girl asked him in response how he was feeling, and he called her a bitch and began to approach her as quickly as possible. He wanted to hit the girl, but suddenly her brother stood up for her and grabbed the naughty boy by the arm. He started fighting with him and kicked him in the stomach with all his might, so that the boy flew far back and fell on his back. The comrades were very worried about their Hyuk Dae win. Hyuk Ki-won asked them to take him and leave immediately if they didn't want to end up like this. The comrades immediately ran to Mr. Hek Dae-vi and asked him to come to his senses. The girl told them that if they needed an antidote, they could chew a pink carnation. Hek Bi-yu continued to watch as they took that nasty boy away, and suddenly her brother turned to her. He approached the girl and asked if she was okay, looking at her carefully. Hek Bi-yu thought that he was probably very scared too. After all, he might look grown up, but he was only 9 years old. The girl decided she needed to calm him down, and she opened her mouth to speak. A trickle of scarlet blood began to flow from her lips. Hyuk Ki-won approached the girl and asked her not to tell him that she was feeling unwell too. He grabbed her shoulders and looked into her eyes, as if he was worried about her. The girl reflected that it wasn't that he was wrong. Technically, she had indeed inhaled some of that toxic smoke. Well, this level of poisoning is nothing. As long as she had clean water, the girl decided she could recover. He started wiping her face with a towel, and she asked what he was doing. Hyuk Ki-won explained that she had inhaled toxic smoke and needed to dry herself off first. Judging by the fact that she had different symptoms than those guys, and he asked if she'd been sick for some time, he knew something was definitely wrong with her. If she were healthy, she'd be living in the main building as her eldest uncle's daughter. But no, Hyuk Ayan is there because she showed signs of the ability as soon as she was born. After the boy wiped her face with a wet towel, he now asked her to simply blow her nose. The girl exclaimed that he was about to rip off her skin. To his knowledge, this body could heal itself. After this, The boy and girl entered the room and sat down at a table opposite each other. Next to the girl was a container of some kind of liquid. Hyuk Ki-won asked the girl if she meant to say she had healing abilities. She was looking at the bottle of liquid in her hands. The boy said she had treated his younger uncle and that he seemed to be recovering, and she had been looking for him to cure his father. The girl replied that everything was exactly as he had just said. She thought to herself that everything would be simpler if her uncle weren't sleeping and was completely useless. Hyuk Ki-won said that he understood everything and said that it was hard to believe, but he just understood the whole situation. But even if that's true, he can't let her meet his father. The girl didn't expect this and asked why, her eyes sad. Could it really be that he didn't trust her skills? The boy, closing his eyes, told the girl that that wasn't the issue. He tried to explain that his father was currently going through a period of insanity and that it was dangerous for her to get too close to him. Madness is a disease in which only the hunting instinct remains, driving its prey to destroy everything nearby. Her eldest uncle, Hyuk Bi-won, became especially dangerous because his bloodlust had become extremely intense. Hyuk Bi-yu heard he was a legendary warrior before he fell ill. He was also a master of lightning and could control thunder. Even the imperial court desperately tried to recruit him, but they failed. The boy exclaimed that his father's illnesses were divided into several stages. His illness is divided into a normal period and a period of acute insanity. During normal periods, he lives like everyone else. Everything happens as in ordinary, everyday life. But during periods of madness, he isolates himself in a cave. Therefore, he will allow her to meet him only when he is in a stable condition. The girl decided that if this was the reason, she simply had no choice, and that was very bad. But she still told the boy that everything was fine. Hyuk Bi-yu told her brother that she would come when his madness ended, and began to get up from the table. When the girl started to get up from the table and go to the door, the boy asked her to wait a little. He asked if she would stay in his house then, looking closely into her eyes, and the girl immediately stopped. She didn't expect this turn of events and asked if he was serious. Hyuk Ki-won replied that he was quite serious and would keep an eye on her. The girl asked her brother if he still didn't understand something and that she wasn't some kind of sick princess. But he was sure she wanted to believe it. Hyuk Ki-won said he understood everything, and his father had denied it at first too. The girl said she was serious when she told him she was fine. Hyuk Ki-won began to explain that it was also dangerous for her to be alone. Hyuk Dae-wi would not ignore today's incident. He'll definitely come to take revenge on her, and he asks her to stay safe with him, especially since he's in her debt and can't leave her alone. Hyuk Bi-yu was very surprised by this turn of events and looked closely at the boy's hand. In his hand was a round white ball from which bright lightning emanated, illuminating the entire room. The boy said, smiling at the girl, that in fact he also had one ability, and it was a secret. In the Hyuk family, if a child shows any ability, or even a hint of it, they are typically raised in the main house. So Hyuk Ki-won hid his ability all this time to keep an eye on his father. The original novel said he was in prison. The boy explained to the girl that when they encountered Hyuk Dae-vi's gang, everything would have been bad if she had not intervened. And if he had been punished for this incident, his father would undoubtedly have been very disappointed. Therefore, let her consider this as a manifestation of his gratitude, and he declares a truce and friendship to her. Besides, it would be better for her to live in his house. He explained to the girl that it was much better than living in a pigsty. Hyuk Bi-yu listened attentively to the boy, looking at him with a smile. She didn't understand, of course, what was wrong with her room. And then she found herself in this room where the boy had brought her. He prepared a variety of dishes and set the table. Hyuk Bi-yu began devouring the various delicacies and closed her eyes in joy. She stayed in Ki-won's house, which turned out to be much more comfortable than she expected. She knew he was a martial arts master, but his housekeeping skills are also top-notch. Is there anything he can't handle? His daily routine was very labor-intensive. At dawn, he collected water, cooked food, and prepared a medicinal tonic. She believes the 4 years spent caring for someone were well worth it. Moreover, it had been a long time since she'd eaten warm food, especially since she'd been eating whatever greens she could find. It wasn't that the servants didn't bring ingredients, but they were all going to her biological father's, and she didn't really want to go there. She is not going to come there in the future, and told her brother that she really wants to meet her older uncle, and asked when it would be possible. Hyuk Ki-won stood in the room with various objects in his hands as he thought about something important. The girl, in turn, sat at the table and looked at the dishes that were in front of her, also thinking about something. Suddenly, the right thought came to her, and the girl decided that she would finally see Hyuk Ki-won. The weather was simply wonderful, and the sun illuminated everything around. There was a bright red ribbon lying on the floor near the door. The boy approached her as quickly as possible and began to lift her from the asphalt. When Hyuk Bi-yu asked what it was, Hyuk Ki-won explained that it was the signal they had agreed upon with their father. If this tape is lying at the entrance, it means his father has regained consciousness, and the tape must be bright red. The girl thought this was very encouraging. The Kiwon she'd met in her first life was at his worst, and his mania had reached its peak. Was this really the first time she'd see her uncle in his normal state? The boy escorted the girl through the green thicket and said he thought her uncle was in the garden. They made their way through the forest thicket, tall, beautiful trees, and the boy said, pointing with his finger, that the man he saw was him. Hyuk Ki-won started calling his father from afar, and the girl watched him attentively from the side, her eyes wide. The man looked quite terrifying. His eyes glowed with a bright, blood-red light, and the girl stared at him with fear. She stood next to the boy, clenching her fists, and beads of cold sweat began to run down her face because she was a little scared and excited. Hek Bi-yu thought about this as she looked at the man, feeling with her whole being that something was wrong with his condition. The girl decided the situation was bad and they were in trouble. The boy, too, peered warily at his father. Hek Bi-yu realized that this man's gaze was unfocused, and this was very bad. They were clearly in danger, and the man was already approaching them to strike. Hyuk Ki-won immediately grabbed the girl in his arms and warned her to be careful. He arrived in time to hold her back when the man had already dealt a powerful blow and the petrified earth had split into many small pieces. The boy's father was in a frantic state and, clutching his face with his hand, asked the boys to leave immediately. At the moment, he was very dangerous and could kill anyone, even his family and friends who were near him. Hyuk Ki-won immediately grabbed the girl to protect her from danger at the moment when her father was already approaching her and wanted to take her by the shoulder. The boy grabbed the girl tighter and asked if she could attack with her ability. Hek Bi-yu replied that she couldn't. She's a healer, after all, and if she had the chance, she would have destroyed the crown prince. The boy asked why his mania hadn't stopped. Normally, it would have ended long ago, but he definitely left the tape at the entrance, and he doesn't understand what just happened to his father. The girl asked her brother to calm down a bit. She asked him to listen carefully, because to stop Uncle, they needed medicine. She needed time to make it. Hek Bi-yu asked how many minutes he could hold Uncle off. Then the boy asked her to ask how many seconds he could hold him back. Hyuk Bi-yu immediately asked, and Hyuk Ki-won replied, 30. The girl said, taking out her vessel with clean, transparent water, that this was quite enough and began to splash water in all directions. After the streams of water scattered towards the man, the girl thought that this ability was originally intended for inspection. The boy's father found himself in the very flow of water that surrounded him from all sides, as if enveloping him. When the girl continued to release streams of water on the man, she exclaimed that she could not hold him back for long. If only her ability had been leveled up a bit, and if So-yeon had been here, everything would have been much easier. The boy said that, frankly, he wasn't sure. He'd never in his life endured more than 3 blows from his father. Still, he continued to use his power and began to draw his weapon from its sheath. Hyuk Ki-won was completely enveloped in a brilliant purple light, like lightning. The boy explained that it was because she had bought him time that he had created this lightning. He simply had to try to harness this power. As lightning began to fly toward the man, he jumped back sharply, falling backward onto the ground. Hyuk Ki-won immediately flew toward him, drawing his sharp sword. When he tried to strike his father, he grabbed his sword with both hands, holding it steady. Hek Bi-yu, looking at the boy in surprise, thought that he fought better than she thought. She watched them fight intently and decided that her uncle had most likely given in. Hyuk Ki-won continued swinging his sharp sword. Unexpectedly, the uncle thrust his hand forward and stopped the boy's powerful blow. Hyuk Ki-won was thrown back, landing on his back. The girl was seriously scared for her brother, and at that moment, the man began to fly towards her to strike. He was in a state of complete madness, and there was no escaping it. Hyuk Ki-won began screaming in fear, looking at his father. Hek Bi-yu closed her eyes and thought about how her 4th attempt would end so quickly, something she hadn't expected. She'd even healed her uncle a little, so she thought everything would be completely different, and this was just the beginning. The girl closed her eyes, and the man asked that when a fist was pointed at her, shouldn't she dodge it? Hyuk Bi-yu opened one eye and looked at the man, asking him what he just said. The boy's father immediately thrust his fist in front of the girl, and the water enveloped the fist, as if taking it away from Hek Bi-yu. The man said it was some kind of unfortunate confrontation. He just opened his eyes, and this happened. The girl didn't expect this turn of events, and looked closely at the boy. When she saw her uncle standing before her, she was overjoyed. She wondered how he'd gotten here. He should be sleeping for another 4 days, and wasn't that right? The boy immediately called out to the little girl. He wondered what would have happened if he hadn't been here now. The boy clutched his head. It was apparently still splitting. To appear at such a critical moment, isn't it wonderful? Hyuk Bi-yu looked at him and thought about it. The boy smiled and exclaimed that he was the best. The girl couldn't understand what was wrong with him and saw a real narcissist in him. Meanwhile, the madman's fist was also tightly clenched and enveloped in streams of clear blue water. It was as if he were in handcuffs. The boy was saying that they might not realize it, but he was truly incredible. The madman was already next to the girl, and the shackles were already very weak. He appeared directly above her head, and the girl screamed in horror. Hekbiyu said it was very different from her water. Hers was made for healing, while this was for fighting. So that's why they say Hyuk Bi-ran is the family's chief water wizard. He continued to help the girl, holding out his hand. The boy was covered in beads of sweat because he wasn't doing everything well yet, and the opponent was really strong. Fighting your older brother when he can barely use his power. Water is more of a disadvantage against lightning. The boy asked the girl if there was any way to stop him. He explained that even he couldn't handle his older brother when he was insane. The girl replied that it was possible, and that the uncle needed to hold out for a while. The boy replied that he understood, that he just needed to hold out for a little while. A huge stream of blue, transparent water was already rising and approaching the girl faster and faster. In front of her, there appeared a huge blue ball that was shrouded in bright lilac lightning. Hekbiyu was surprised by the lightning strike and couldn't figure out when it had happened. Her cure was truly incredible. The boy continued to hold his opponent to give the girl time. Looking at her, he asked if he had told her that he would not last long and that he could not hold on to him any longer. Hekbiyu was not far from her brother and approached him as quickly as possible. Hyuk Ki-won also approached the girl as quickly as possible. They were already facing each other, and she asked him to help quickly. The girl showed him the flower she was holding in her palm and asked if he had seen such a red flower in the West Wing. The boy replied that he had seen her and, grabbing her, began carrying her to a certain place. He doesn't know who is preparing drugs or anesthetics here, but there are many poisonous flowers in the garden, including poppies. It seemed as if someone had specially planted these flowers, and there was a whole huge meadow of them. Suddenly, the girl took her vessel again and began to splash streams of water towards these flowers, and the boy watched what she was doing. Hekbiyu asked her uncle to be patient a little longer. Meanwhile, the boy continued to try to hold his opponent at bay with a stream of water. The boy's older brother was very nice at first, until he fell ill. The enemy began shouting, looking at him with a malicious, cunning gaze. Their fight continued, and the boy said that he did not give him even a minute to indulge in memories. So, let's say he kills his younger brother, and the boy, gritting his teeth, remains rooted to the spot. Thus, all the brothers eventually contracted these nasty diseases. It's just a disgrace to the entire Heck family. And on the other hand, how 3 of the head's children developed incurable diseases. And these 3 were martial artists, which could be a hint at the Heck family's downfall. This tragedy could have had a profound impact on the children as well. Who knows? Perhaps these diseases are hereditary, and that is why all the brothers and other family members are sick. While the guys were sitting at the table, someone suddenly started kicking down the door and entering the room. He asked them what they had just said, and they saw a mad Hyuk Bi-ran standing before them. He continued asking them what they had just said, and those sitting at the table immediately apologized to him. Leaving his daughter in the care of a trusted confidant and confining himself to the East Wing, he held little hope. He thought he would die in one of his endless dreams. The boy thought about how, when his brother was approaching him to strike, he saw a ray of hope. He exclaimed, looking at his brother, that he would protect this girl and tried to reach out to his older brother. He began to explain to the madman that if she died, they would be left with nothing. It seems she was a genius who could save them. That's why he asks her not to touch her under any circumstances. He continued to stop his brother and pushed him back a little. Hyuk Ki-won and the girl were already next to them, and the boy began to call out to his uncle, approaching him as quickly as possible. Hekbiyu immediately handed the item she was holding to her uncle, and he grabbed it with one hand. He had some kind of syringe-shaped object with a long, sharp needle in his hand. The boy asked his uncle to inject the syringe directly into the enemy's artery. It seemed like a foolproof plan. He listened attentively to the boys, and immediately approached his brother. He asked where the artery was and thought it was probably somewhere in the neck. The boy found an artery and stuck the needle right into the crazy brother's neck. The brother didn't expect such a turn of events and fell after the needle entered his artery. The boy did this, and the girl began to approach him, exclaiming that everything was ready. The boy asked his niece why his older brother had fallen unconscious. When Hekbiyu approached him, she said it was because it was a tranquilizer. It was strong enough to knock out 10 elephants. They tied him up just in case, and the guy was still lying unconscious and tied with strong, thick ropes. The uncle asked the girl if she was sure the tranquilizer wouldn't cause any problems. The girl replied that she had already said no. She couldn't understand why he didn't believe her, why he seemed so impenetrable, like a tank. It wasn't poison, and she had considered its side effects after all. Thank God. She remembers how she treated her uncle in her first life. The boy asked the girl why she was so sure of this, and she said it was because she was a genius. The uncle told the girl, grabbing her cheeks, that this did not explain anything, and did she really want to die? Suddenly, Hyuk Ki-won turned to his uncle and asked him to stop checking on her, because the boy believed the girl. The boy was very surprised and turned his head towards Hyuk Ki-won. Then the boy said that too much time had passed. However, before they exchange pleasantries, he wants to say something. BU is still a child, and it's not appropriate for him to act like a scoundrel. She's much weaker than an ordinary child, and he's asking her to think about her behavior. The boy explained that his uncle needed to realize how inappropriate his behavior was. His uncle told Ki-won that he was grumbling as usual and sounded just like an older sister-in-law. It gave him goosebumps. The boy still called his uncle childish. While they were talking, the man who was tied up chuckled, and the girl immediately turned in his direction. He said, surprised that he hadn't died after all. When he looked at the girl, he said that he saw a lovely little fairy. The girl immediately approached the man and called the boy to come to her. For the first time, she saw him not in a state of madness. He was very different from what she imagined. The boy was very surprised that he was still alive, and how could this have happened? His younger brother immediately turned his head and called out to his older brother. He was surprised to find him already awake. Hyuk Ki-won also approached his father as quickly as possible and asked if he was okay. The man smiled at his son and replied that he was fine. He asked his son not to cry because his wonderful father's hands were tied, so he couldn't even console him. The father laughed and said that when he passed away, he would definitely tell his mother that their son was a crybaby. Hyuk Ki-won asked him not to say that, because this time, the truth was very dangerous. The man replied that he clearly remembered it, and his mother threatened to kill him if he harmed anyone, especially him. The younger brother was very surprised that he was still laughing, and the older one immediately greeted him. The boy replied that he wasn't in the mood to say hello. His older brother asked him what was wrong with his body, making him unable to exert himself at all. The boy replied that it was because of the tranquilizer. He asked, surprised, about the tranquilizer they'd just talked about. It was different from the one he usually used. The man started groaning about his sore bones and said he couldn't move. The girl wondered if he always behaved like this. Of course he can't move, and if he can move with a dose of this tranquilizer, she would be very surprised. So, this is how powerful a body blessed by a dragon is. Some people from the Eastern continent are just like these guys. These people are born twice as strong and powerful as ordinary people, blessed by the dragon worshipped on the Eastern continent. But the Western continent has something similar to the dragon's blessing because they worship dragons as gods. And the Heck family trains such people as warriors. In a land filled with hatred, it's fair to assume warriors will protect doctors. But that's a privilege she's never had the pleasure of enjoying. But it's best to start with the fact that she had no one on her side at all. In her third life, she only had one friend. But Heck Bu closed her eyes and sadly thought about forgetting about it. In any case, if not for their illnesses, both brothers would have been excellent warriors. Therefore, if she builds a good relationship with them, she will have ample support to overcome any difficulties. While the girl was thinking about this, the older brother, already smiling and looking at her, began to address her. The boy asked who the little fairy was and called her a beautiful girl. Heck Bu didn't expect that and blushed slightly as she looked at him. She greeted her uncle and introduced herself as Heck Bu. The boy responded by calling her BBU. The girl replied that she was not BBU, but simply BU. Then he agreed with her and called her Squeaky. He asked the girl what brought Squeaky here to him. Suddenly her gaze changed, and she thought that if he found out that she had prepared a tranquilizer, he might misunderstand it. Her version is safe, and she designed it with the side effects in mind. But the family has been trying harsh tranquilizers on my uncle for a long time. If she wasn't careful, he might misunderstand and become very angry. The girl decided to remain quiet for now. Hyuk Ki-won came up behind her, grabbed her by the shoulders, and exclaimed that she had helped her father. She was a distant relative, and she made the tranquilizer that calmed my father. She claimed she could cure his illness. The girl was a little upset and wondered why he couldn't keep quiet now. Then the man chuckled and looked at her again. He said that this little fairy was actually a real fairy. He called her a fairy again and wanted to ask her something, but Heck Bu, upset, asked him not to call her that, and walked towards him with a slow but confident step. Then he extended his hand to the girl and said that he would call her Squeaky. When Heck Bu came as close to him as possible, he placed his hand on her head and looked at her intently. Afterwards, the boy thanked the girl for her help. She was very surprised and asked if he was angry with her. The boy turned around and said he had no reason to be angry. Thanks to her, he didn't harm anyone, but he really regretted not turning Biran into fried fish. Having said this, he laughed out loud. The brother asked who he'd just called a fish and whether he thought he'd let it go. The brother continued to say that perhaps his son would suffer because of him, and he wanted to avoid that as much as possible. The boy again placed his hand on the girl's head and called her his benefactress, smiling sweetly. Heck Bu was very surprised by such a relaxed and warm attitude towards her, something she had not felt for a very long time. The family had always considered it just a tool, and that was very strange. The boy wondered if the squeaker would heal him and his brother. Then he thought for a moment, grabbed his chin with his hand, and said that everything was clear to him now and that it was quite reasonable. But he certainly appreciates her impulse. However, he is very curious about something, and the girl looked at him carefully. The boy approached her, looked into her eyes, and asked why they first. Hyuk-Ba-yu apologized, blushed again, and glanced at him. The boy explained that she had closer relatives. When he said this, he mentioned Hekbi-Hu's name. The girl was simply shocked by the boy's attitude towards her, and here in front of us was a green, deciduous forest, in the middle of which was a lake and a small building with a roof, like a gazebo. The boy continued talking and explaining to the girl that he meant her father, who lived in the East Wing. Hekbi-Hu was the girl's father the boy had just mentioned. He had fallen ill and was locked in the East Wing, like his brothers. In the original story, he died very early, and she still doesn't know why. She thought about how she would never be the first to look for such a father. Hekbi-Yu closed her eyes, feeling very upset, and thought that at first she was happy to find out that she had a father, because in Korea, she was an orphan. The girl recalled everything that happened to her at that moment with sadness in her eyes. Even though she had met good friends and people who treated her warmly, deep down, she still longed for a real family. That's why she waited for a very long time. Even when she suffered abuse or was beaten like some kind of slave, she remembered how she sat in the corner, hugging herself and dreaming that her father would find her, and that one day he would save her from here. She always dreamed that this was when she would finally have a family and be the happiest little girl in the world. But in her first life, she never met her father. In her second life, her desire grew even stronger, but even when she was falsely accused, she still didn't give up. The girl told her sister that she probably didn't deliver the letter to her father. She began to explain that her father had said he didn't have a daughter. When Hekbi-Yu heard this, it was another very strong and terrible blow for her. Having been abandoned in both lives, in the third she left her family without any regrets and ran away as quickly as possible. This is already her fourth life, and her father is no longer in it. Even if he had his reasons, that doesn't change the fact that he didn't help her. And if he doesn't have them, she'll be even angrier. In this life, she's decided to focus on returning home. She has no time to worry about a father who might not even exist. She closed her eyes and thought about this man calling her a squeaker, and grabbed her dress and clenched her fists. She decided to reassure herself, as she hadn't expected such a question. Besides, there was a reason she wanted to save her eldest uncle. The reason she came to him first is because, although he doesn't remember, he was very kind to her. It happened in her first life, when her eldest uncle's madness reached its peak. When he was completely enveloped by the evil, cruel disease, the man asked everyone else to leave immediately. Hyuk-Bi-won was in a terrible rage at that moment. He pushed everyone aside and spilled rivers of blood. Who suggested pushing this monster into the enemy army so it could destroy them all along with itself? The girl said they would die before they could push it through. The boys asked someone to stop Hyuk-Bi-won. One of them suddenly grabbed her hand and pulled her toward him. Looking into the girl's eyes, he said that she had the ability to heal and asked if he was speaking correctly. Before he could even wait for an answer, he said that that was just fine and that she would go with him. He asked her to go immediately and stop him and let go of the girl's hand. The guy was truly distraught and covering his face with his hands. He made terrible sounds and asked the girl to leave. At the time, the Heck family wanted to provoke their eldest uncle into madness and send him to the enemy army. But when his madness became uncontrollable, they made her the scapegoat. The girl closed her eyes, and she was wounded. When she opened them, the boy looked at her and said that she was very young, and he hugged her and approached her. He looked the girl in the eye and said he was truly sorry and called her a sweet child. Tears began to flow from his eyes, and she said she had no need to apologize. The real evil is her family, who won't let her die peacefully. But she still thanks him because he's the only person who will regret her death. Elder Uncle is the only person who was truly kind to her, and she will never forget it. He asked in surprise if that was really true. She had ignored him in her last 2 lives because she simply didn't have the strength. But this time, she wants to help him at all costs. The girl smiled and said that she had already explained to him that he wouldn't remember this. The boy, holding his face with his hand, said that it was very strange and impossible for him to forget such a sweet and beautiful girl. Hyuk-Ki-won told his father he sounded like a scoundrel when he said that. The second brother asked, what about him then? He looked at the girl and asked, what if they assumed that she wanted to see her older brother? But then, why was she looking for him? Hyuk-Bi-yu thought it would be awkward to say she wanted to recruit him as a bodyguard against her crazy older brother. Then she replied that it was for a number of reasons. The guy asked how it was, just for a few reasons, a little annoyed. He's some kind of dessert, and for him, this is an optional but pleasant bonus. He should have gone to him, to his brother, first. Hek-Bi-yu started coughing and said she'd developed a sudden cough, so he decided to avoid the question. The girl said to her eldest uncle that, let's say, everything will be all right now and she can heal him. The boy immediately replied to the girl that he was very grateful to her, even if these were just words, and was ready to listen to her and get treatment. But his brother approached him and asked if he thought all this was nonsense. He understands his feelings, because at first he thought so too. The younger brother told the older one that he really should believe her. He should believe the girl, because he woke up 3 days later thanks to Heck BU. The boy looked at him in surprise and asked if it was really true. The younger brother hugged him by the shoulder and, smiling, looking into his eyes, said that this was so, and that meant that she was a real doctor. They were looking at a genius who had become the best in the city, even the entire country. The brother looked at him in surprise, deciding that the younger one was jumping to conclusions. He became too suggestible when he started sleeping all the time. How can he talk like that after all his long explanations? If their capricious junior speaks like that, then she really is different from the doctors they have seen before. In that case, he called her a squeaker again and said that she seemed to have a good understanding of how things were in this place, so he asked permission to ask her. He wondered what she wanted in return for saving him. Hyuk Bu thought it was as expected, and her uncle was straightforward. He even noticed that her kindness wasn't based on altruism. The girl remarked that she'd like him to do one thing now, and pointed. She asked the boy to be her bodyguard and take her to the herbal market. This was her wish even before she came here. Heck Bu explained to the boy that she had formed a bond with the future warriors. Now it was time to move on to the next step. She thought to herself that she was already on her way to becoming the greatest doctor, and that this was simply brilliant and wonderful. The boy told the girl he was afraid it might be difficult. Hyuk Bu asked what he meant. She wondered why, and the older brother explained that because the younger one and he had been isolated for a long time, and there were cases when they harmed others. They were simply all forbidden to leave. The girl hadn't expected this and was seething with anger and such an unexpected answer. Heck Bu exclaimed that this simply couldn't be true. They had no idea how long she'd waited to go to the market. To think that the warriors she'd been searching for so long were under house arrest. The girl explained that she was still too young to leave without a bodyguard, and asked if there was absolutely no way. The guy replied that it wasn't exactly that there wasn't. There was one person in the East Wing, and only one patient wasn't prohibited from leaving. Heck Bu began to listen to him more carefully, and the man explained that he was talking about her father, Heck Bu. Now she was even more surprised and exclaimed that she simply couldn't believe it, since she had tried so hard to ignore him all this time. And now she needed to find him. Heck Bu was already in a bright, green, sunlit meadow. She approached a plant and began pulling at it with all her might. The girl suffered for a long time, but finally she pulled it out and fell, covering her ears, as it was difficult for her to get this plant out. She mentioned that she had medicinal herbs in front of her. She needed high-quality herbs to treat her patients. What's in the East Wing isn't nearly enough. One of the 3 largest markets is right outside the wall, so why can't she find it? The girl was very upset and asked if she really had to run away alone. She lay on the ground and thought about how impossible it was. Who knows what might happen if she goes out alone in the body of a 3-year-old? There are groups that visit children to harness the Heck family's healing powers. She told her brothers that, at this rate, she might forget about her goal of becoming the greatest doctor. She couldn't even separate herself from her family. The boy approached her as she lay on the ground and asked what she was doing. He asked why she was lying on the ground. Then the girl asked him in return if she had seen it. She explained that it was all her uncle's fault, and she didn't know. The boy asked if she was an earthworm, meant to roll around on the ground. Heck Bu called him dirt, because they say even earthworms clean the soil. The boy asked where she learned to talk like that. Kiwon's brother was passing by and heard some noise, looking at the boys. An uncle was lying on the grass with a little girl in his arms. He asked the man what he was doing and began to approach them. The boy was very angry and asked how many times he had to repeat that Bu was only 3 years old. The uncle asked the girl to wait and said it wasn't fair, since the baby was also pinching. But the boy asked what was unfair about that. Children should be treated with care. He had a daughter, so why was he acting like that? The man replied that he intended to be the kindest gentleman to his daughter. Hyuk Bu was uninterested in whether that was even possible, as he could ruin his image just by opening his mouth. Hyuk Ki-won said he had no idea how ignorant their younger uncle was. Maybe they could chat a little, and an hour should be enough. The guy asked the boy if he was a teacher, and why he should waste his precious time on him. Hyuk Ki-won asked if he'd rather talk to his father back then. The boy explained that he was playing too dirty at the time. At that moment, the girl began to move away, and thought that he seemed rather uncomfortable in his uncle's presence. 3 days had passed since her meeting with her uncle. The girl approached him again and asked if only her father could do this. She asked if there was another way out of this situation. It turns out, It was out of pride and disappointment. The older brother exclaimed with a smile that this wasn't true at all, although there was something to it. He explained that her father needed to transfer custody rights to them. Only then will they be able to discuss all this with their elders, and there will at least be some kind of solution. The girl sighed heavily and, catching her breath, thought that in any case she would have to meet her father. She's been thinking about it for the past few days, but she really doesn't want it. She wants to avoid meeting him if at all possible. Hyuk Ki-won looked at the girl and asked her what she was doing here. Hyuk Bi-yu explained to the boy that she was gathering herbs here. Hyuk Ki-won asked him to leave this task to his younger uncle. He explained to the girl that he had energy that absolutely needed to be expended, or she could ask him to do it, and he took her hands. The boy looked the girl in the eyes and said that not only his father and younger uncle were indebted to her, but he too. After all, she's been his benefactor for life. Hyuk Bi-yu thought that it really was true, and she had saved him from imprisonment. The girl shook the boy's hand in return, and, stroking his head, asked him to become stronger and repay his debt. Hyuk Ki-won was, of course, surprised by such impudence when the girl told him to become stronger and repay his debt. He considered this a pretty good mood. Hyuk Bi-yu continued to act like a grown-up girl. Suddenly, they heard some kind of squeaking sound, and the girl asked what it could be. She immediately turned her head in the direction from which this strange sound came, and her uncle appeared in front of her. She found herself in his arms and saw in front of her some small animal that was making this amazing sound. When she held the little animal in her arms, the boy said it was a nozu. Did he mean brain fluid? And why was he thinking about such a nasty thing? The boy remarked that he wasn't talking about that at all, and that he was referring to the spirit beast created from lightning. The beast made that strange, unusual sound again. A spirit beast is something incredible. When the owner of a natural ability is particularly strong, the power itself gains sentience and takes the form of a beast. The real protagonist, Hek Ah-yan, had a spirit beast in the shape of a sparrow. She'd heard that the closer the beast was to a real animal, the stronger it was. The older brother had a black one like that, and the girl asked if he had one too. Uncle must have a spirit beast like that too, so why didn't she see it when Uncle was angry? He deliberately keeps it a secret. He went crazy then too. So let her just imagine if a crazy beast appeared next to him. Sometimes there are people from the Western continent with spirit beasts, so it's not surprising at all. But she didn't know that Ki-won had this beast. Hyuk Bi-yu said she hadn't even heard that was in the story. The boy continued to hold the animal in his arms. He asked the boy why he was pretending not to see him. After all, the little animal was calling for its master. Hyuk Ki-won replied that he had deliberately not wanted to bother him. The boy asked him not to say that he was now denying the existence of Neozu. When he said this, he held out this little animal towards the boy, and he still did not raise his head to look at it. The boy laughed and said that other people couldn't get it, even if they begged for it for a long time and tediously. He doesn't know if he knows, but these things grow on the master's recognition and trust. He asked to look at him because the little beast is nothing but skin and bones, and if he continues to deny it, things will get worse. Hyuk Ki-won told his father that he knew, and that he had explained it to him. He knew it, so he asked not to tell him about it. Hyuk Bi-yu, meanwhile, was listening in on the conversation and looked closely at the little animal. She turned to her uncle and asked what it all meant. He immediately glanced back at her. Among those who use abilities, very few develop such spirit beasts. Such people can become twice as powerful by fusing with their spirit beast, but that's only if the master acknowledges his existence. At this rate, he won't survive long. When the boy explained this, he held out his hand on which lay this little animal, very sad and quite thin. The boy exclaimed, looking at the boy, that this boy was wasting his chance and didn't even realize it. Hyuk Ki-won exclaimed, turning away, that he wasn't wasting it. He couldn't explain to them what was happening, and said that he couldn't see him even if he wanted to. He just couldn't do it. Then the guy asked the boy if he was afraid that his older brother's illness would be passed on to his children. It's obvious that he's simply terrified that he'll harm a large number of people while possessing a spirit beast. He is afraid that the boy will do it just like his father. And when Hyuk Ki-won heard this, he clenched his fists and his eyes became too sad. Who even knows? Maybe these diseases are really hereditary. How come he doesn't understand it? Then the uncle asked why he needed to know this. He too was terrified that his illness might be passed on to his daughter. Their conversation continued, and when his uncle said this, Hyuk Ki-won turned away and continued to stare at one point. Then the girl decided to take matters into her own hands and asked why they were worrying about such trifles. Hyuk Bi-yu put her hand on her heart and told the boys that they had a brilliant doctor. When she diagnosed her eldest uncle, the amount of medication was not small, but still less than for the other uncle. She also has experience treating insanity and seizures, gained in her third life. She won't have any problems finding ingredients on the market when needed. She can also improve this body's skills in the process of medicine making. Yu said they'd already seen her abilities. Even Uncle Sleepyhead, who had an incurable illness, was on the mend. She is much better than he thinks, and the longer he looks, the more interesting things he will see. He just needs to trust her. That's why, when the girl took the animal in her hands, she asked the boy not to think about anything else except repaying the debt. She held the little animal in her hands and asked the boy to take it. Hyuk Ki-won looked closely at the small orange lump lying crumpled in her palms. The girl continued to ask him to take this animal and said that there would be nothing wrong if he took it. As far as she remembers, Hyuk Ki-won will become gloomy due to his father's death, but he will not suffer from madness. Even if this happens, she will definitely cure him, and she is completely confident of this. So she hands the animal over to him. Hyuk Ki-won said that he had no intention of getting rid of him or ignoring him. He continued to explain to the girl that, of course, he'd thought about it, but he was truly terrified. He even wondered why he'd appeared when he really didn't want it, and his uncle was right. Now the boy looked confidently into the girl's eyes and said with tears that he was no longer afraid of this. Though he hated it, his father's condition worsened, and he constantly imagined a future where he too would fall ill and no longer thought it would happen. The boy said it was all thanks to her. He will work hard to pay her. Since she is a genius, she will need warriors to protect her. He extended his hands to the little creature and said that it too wanted to become stronger. He had been a bad master, and he hoped it wouldn't disappear now. When he took the little animal in his arms, with tears in his eyes, he said that now he would try not to turn away from this little one under any circumstances. He looked into the eyes of the little animal and said that he would not leave again, and the fluffy one also looked at him attentively. In the original novel, there was a line saying that the spirit beast and the ability user are life partners who are closely connected. In his past life, he denied the existence of his partner and eventually got rid of him with his own hands. She wondered how that boy Hyuk Ki-won felt then. In any case, it's always gratifying to see a patient overcome difficulties and recover, even though her brother isn't actually sick. There were times when this was the only solace in this terrible world. His uncle remarked that he could still say something sweet, and the boy asked not to touch him when he tried to stroke his head. Suddenly, the little animal began to fly from the boy's hands toward the girl. Hekbi-yu asked him if he wanted to thank her. As she held it in her hands, she said it looked a lot like a chick, which was cute. The little animal continued to squeak as if it wanted to say something. He doesn't have time to worry about a father who may not even exist. Little brother Ki-won decided to face his fears, and he hopes that there is still hope and a future for him. In any case, she needed to meet them too, and it was ridiculous to leave when she'd yelled at him with such confidence. Hyuk Bi-yu suddenly exclaimed that she'd changed her mind. She approached the boy and said she really wanted to meet her father. This was also a surprise for them, and they stared at the girl in surprise. Hek Bi-yu continued to stand with her head down on the green, sunny meadow, and closing her eyes, caught her breath. She noticed when she opened her eyes and looked at the two of them that they both looked very surprised. She barely managed to stop them from taking her there, and she headed across the bridge over the stream herself. This time, she really wanted to go there alone. Her father, Hek Bi-hu, in her first, second, and third lives, and until she decided to go to him herself, he was a man who never looked for her. She heard that her mother died early due to illness, and they say that her father did not even come to her then to see her off on her final journey. She's heard so much over 3 lifetimes, so she's still not sure what this illness is. But since she's decided to meet him, she needs to think clearly. Strictly speaking, having an existing father is better for achieving her goal. It's worth considering how it can be used and whether it's needed. She'll come and offer a contract, and she'll treat him simply as a business partner. Thinking about this, the girl said that this was all because she didn't really need her father, and she didn't want to see him before. Walking through the abandoned east wing, from any end one could see a beautiful cherry blossom tree in bloom, and there was a person underneath it. The boy was very thoughtful and sat under the branches of a blossoming sakura tree, looking into the distance. He seemed to merge with this nature, and when the girl approached him, he called her a sweet, beautiful child. Looking into her eyes, the man asked who she was. Hyuk Bi-yu replied that she was the daughter he had left behind in all 4 of his lives. This man was her father, and she had a lot she wanted to tell him, but before that, she wanted to call him that at least once. The girl bowed to him and said, hello. But she didn't call him her father, but simply called him uncle, being upset and a little angry at him. It's an understatement to say he's angry. She's never seen him or felt his care in all her lives. It should be said with obvious displeasure, but she came out a bit too softly. The man looked at her with interest when she called him uncle, and then looked at her even more closely. When he stood up, the girl looked at him in surprise. He said he'd ask her again who she was. Hyuk Bi-yu was very surprised by his height. She lost her temper and called him uncle, but it seemed there was no room for jokes anymore. In this life, she needs to befriend this man. And when he stood in front of her, asking this question, the girl replied that she was his daughter. The man was very surprised to hear this and asked what she had just told him. Heck Bu replied that she had said that she was his daughter. Then the man, clutching his face, said he didn't have a daughter. The girl thought he was starting with such an unpleasant remark, but now she understood everything, and his illness erased all his memories, which is why he did not remember her. His memories of his parents, friends, cousins, wife, and even her were completely erased from his mind. Her father's illness, in its terrestrial equivalent, is Alzheimer's, a condition in which memories are erased and episodes of mental fog become increasingly frequent. She only realized this in her third life, but now it doesn't matter. Hyuk Bu said she's not angry if he doesn't remember her, but if he brought her into this world, then let him at least take responsibility. And the man stood in front of the girl, looking attentively, crossing his arms over his chest and listening to her. He said he understood everything, and it seemed someone had said that he was married. Therefore, it could be true that she was his daughter. The man lifted the girl into the air with one thought and asked why he should believe this, looking at her carefully. Heck Bu realized that it was the power of the wind, and her eyes were very surprised, because this is exactly what her uncle was talking about. It was her father's ability, and at that moment, the boy wondered why she was asking about it. Hyuk Bu answered the boy that she had never seen it. Then he asked how she'd lived all this time without knowing this, and whether such a thing was even possible. The girl considered this at that moment. Uncle mentioned that he had a very bad headache, and why he and not his older brother. Heck Bu asked if Uncle had gone into seclusion, claiming he hadn't fully stabilized yet. Moreover, she felt uncomfortable being around this man. She felt as if he could see right through her. She asked if he would tell her or not, or if she should just leave. The boy asked her to stay and promised to tell her everything. He explained that, first and foremost, her father controlled the wind, and he's incredibly strong, equal to his brother, or even stronger. Right now, he lives alone at the far end of the East Wing and rarely ventures out. He might not even recognize her, and her mother might not either. But at least he knows he was married and he just can't remember. The boy leaned over to the girl, and when she asked what was wrong with his illness, he simply grinned and didn't know what to say. Then she asked him if he knew anything about his illness. The boy's expression changed slightly, and he grabbed his head with his hand, as it was splitting very badly, and he said that he didn't know. He asked to meet him personally, and the girl was now right above the head of her father, who controlled the power of the wind. Heck Bu thought that she would be surprised if she didn't know about his incredible ability, and she glanced off to the side. The girl noticed the pond and was surprised to see a pond in such a place. She was delighted because she could use it now if things went south. The man asked her if she was saying that she was his daughter, and said that she was not at all like him, but was saying such things so shamelessly. Hyuk Bu said it was because she was the spitting image of her mother. She too was surprised when she first saw his portrait. The man remarked that she wasn't the first to spout such nonsense. He seems to be made ridiculous by his pathetic, ill state. And now they're even dragging children into their scams. The man continued to say that he didn't care why she came to him, because he was not her father. Then the girl approached him and called him trash. The man asked her if she wanted to fall into the pond, and she called him trash again. The girl said he would definitely regret it. She told her father that whether he believed it or not, she was a doctor and a pharmacist. He was very surprised, and asked if a small fry like her could really be a doctor. Hyuk Bu replied that she wasn't lying and she could prove it. The girl handed him something and said it was a paternity test. He knew what that was. They will mix their blood and check the color, and if they are related, the color will be blue, and if not, it will be black. She needs just one drop of his blood to prove it, and that's all she needs from him now. When the man gave her his drop of blood, the girl asked to look at the blue color. She thought it was wonderful that even in a place like this, they had a paternity test. Because of the problems with illegitimate children, such tests were more common in noble families than on Earth. The father mentioned that such things were easy to fake, and the girl exclaimed that it wasn't fake, and he could go out and check it himself. He could easily tell whether it was fake or not, or he could give her some of her blood so he could check it himself and be sure. The man replied that, judging by how careless she was about her body, he would believe she was his daughter. Hyuk Bu sensed his sarcasm, but she decided she had to say what needed to be said. The girl said she didn't want to talk about their relationship. When the man asked what exactly she wanted to talk about, the girl said that she was his daughter and had come to heal him. She looked into the man's eyes and said, calling him her father, that she would heal him. Therefore, she asks him to make a contract with her and become her bodyguard to protect her. The man exclaimed that this was a very good offer. Treatment from the best doctor, no SMS or registration required. Heck Bu decided she just needed to offer her strength. When she thought about this, she began to open her vessel with clear blue water and release a whole stream towards the man. She asked him if he saw her strength, because she had said and not lied that she really was a doctor. The man smiled and said that she even had the ability and grinned a little. Suddenly, he moved very quickly towards her face and asked her to look at him. The girl, a little frightened, was surprised. She didn't expect him to respond so quickly and asked if he wanted her to do it right then. He immediately replied yes, and the girl agreed and began releasing streams of water in his direction. She thought about how she had been planning to have an examination anyway, but she hadn't expected him to suggest it first. She had already treated illnesses that affected memory, but she had not dealt with her father's illness. Probably, as with the uncles, ingredients and formulas will appear. But here she was very surprised, because nothing happened, and there were no ingredients, no formulas, nothing at all. This only happens when diagnosing a dead person. Aside from the incurable disease she encountered in her third life, she had never seen such a result in a living person. The girl wondered if this meant that she could not cure this man, and she felt very sad and sorrowful. Hekbiyu decided it was written all over her face. The man was watching her closely as she performed these water tricks. Streams of water poured around him, and he continued to watch her actions. He asked if she was really incapable of giving any answer. The man approached the girl and said that she was just like everyone else. If she had known this would happen, she should have just left. He won't hold it against her for pretending to be his daughter. Hyuk-bi-yu sadly lowered her head and clenched her fists, but suddenly, when he turned his back on her, the girl exclaimed that she wasn't lying. She hadn't found the answer yet, but her abilities were real. She has already proven that she is a brilliant doctor and pharmacist, and he cannot believe it, even when he saw everything she just showed. She really is his daughter, and why would she lie to him? Does he think she came here because she just wanted to? She absolutely had to go to the market, and the girl continued to convince the man that she was his daughter. There were many other reasons why she needed to go besides buying ingredients. She had to convince him, even if she didn't want to. Hekbiyu approached the man and said that she knew he didn't choose his illness, but she also knows that he is a really bad father, and hopes that he will understand this someday in his life. When the girl said all this, the man said that if she was already finished, then she should leave. Hyuk-bi-yu closed her eyes, deeply disappointed. Suddenly, she began to run away with tears in her eyes, saying that he really was her father. And who said he couldn't be cured? The girl exclaimed as she left, that he simply gave up before his brothers. The water in the pond looks very clear. She's not sure, but there's no time for doubt, so she starts approaching the source. The girl understood perfectly well when she ran to the pond that it was a big risk, but she wanted to try at all costs. Hekbiyu had already run to the pond and jumped in. As she dove, she noticed the water was truly clear. She realized she could use it, and this was her final ability. Her father appeared nearby and grabbed her by the collar. The girl exclaimed that he had saved her and that he was kind, so she was taking back her words. The man noticed that she jumped on purpose, and the girl said that there was a reason for it. She asked if he could let her go into the water for a little while, and he agreed and let her go. She and the patient are now standing in clean water. All the conditions for activating her ability have been created, and that's very good. A whole stream of clear water began to rise and approach them, completely enveloping the girl and the man who was her father. This stream of water was like some kind of transparent small dragon that rose high into the sky. When they reached the pond, the girl swam as close to him as possible. She needed to understand the patient's condition. She found herself next to him and touched her father's forehead with her hand, as he also plunged with her into the very depths of the pond. Hekbiyu was overjoyed and, smiling, said that the treatment was beginning. She had 3 abilities in total. The first is the ability to heal one's own wounds with pure water. The second is the ability to conduct diagnostics and identify medicinal ingredients and formulas. And the last one, which she didn't tell anyone about, was the ability to heal others at the cost of her own life. The leaves on the tree resemble her own life. And how long will it take her to cure this serious illness? Did healing her father really mean she would die? That's what the girl thought as she touched his forehead in the pond. She decided that this wouldn't work, and that for now, it would be better to concentrate on partial recovery rather than complete healing. She would rather restore some of her father's memories, and her hand lit up when she closed her eyes and touched her forehead. Meanwhile, the boy begged Ah-hyun to let him go outside with him. He really needed to get out of this yard. The guy didn't agree and said that he had a reason why he definitely had to go and headed towards the exit. Then the boy asked if he was going to meet that sister again. The boy replied that he was, and that his older brother had told him so. This is his first love, and is he really trying to run away because of her? The boy wondered if it was really that obvious, and that he wasn't very good at hiding it. He wants her name to have "you" in it. Hyuk-bi-yu closed her eyes and continued trying to heal her father. A picture appeared of a guy standing next to a woman who was sitting on a chair opposite him. She thought that she looked like her, but much more beautiful, and now everything was clear to her. She understood who this girl was. The girl and her father continued to spin in the streams of clear blue water, and then he pulled her out of the pond. Hekbi said with a smile that she had just tried hard and asked how her treatment was going. Her father lifted her up and, looking her in the eye, asked her who she really was, waiting for an answer. The man remarked that no matter how talented any member of the family might be, there was no one like her. Hekbi asked him to be quiet and said that it was a secret, and a great commercial secret. A trade secret about her ability to cure incurable diseases at the cost of her own life is truly incredible. If her ability is revealed, she'll be in danger, so it's a secret. She had only used this ability once a long time ago, and never thought she would be able to see her mother's face. After all, she hadn't even imagined him, and yet there was one disturbing detail. When memories of her mother were restored, her father's consciousness temporarily clouded. So it's highly likely that her father didn't see these memories. But she wondered why, and whether it was related to his illness. The man, looking into his daughter's eyes, said that her abilities had been confirmed. He asked why she had proven her abilities. Then the girl pointed her finger towards the townhouses and said that she was going to go there, to the main building of the Heck family. She wants to be accepted there and doesn't want to be abandoned as an adult. So she'll do everything she can to get there as soon as possible. The man listened attentively, and the girl added that it was both a pact and a deal. If he helped her, it was highly likely that she would cure him. When she grows up, she'll be able to heal him more effectively. If she truly returns home in this life, this body will no longer be of any use. Before returning, she could use the treasure to spend the rest of her life. This way, she could cure her father's illness. So she asked him to become her bodyguard and help her achieve the goal she was now striving for. The man asked the girl her name. When she said she was his daughter, he asked her to state hers. The girl smiled happily and said that her name was Hekbi, and he looked closely into her eyes. The man said he'd met countless doctors and pharmacists in his life, but she was the first one who truly made him feel better. With the help of such a young doctor, he feels as if some spirit has possessed him. She clearly has talent, and that cannot be denied. Hekbi, looking at her father, thought that his illness had only eased slightly, while the symptoms would continue to manifest. Since he was already going to forget everything, the girl thought it would be a good time to have a little casual conversation. She explained to her father that she actually came from another world. He asked if she had been sent here because of an illness, and the girl replied that she wasn't sick and that her abilities were real. He wouldn't believe her anyway, so the man said he would help her. Suddenly, he pulled her to his chest and stroked her head, promising to fulfill her wish. She hadn't expected such treatment, and tears welled up in her eyes. The girl felt very sad because this hand was so tender that she was haunted by strange fantasies, and she blushed a little. She asked her father if he knew something. They say that each of them, along with her mother, contributed a little something to her name. This was the only story about her parents she'd heard in her third life. She'd prefer he didn't remember it, and since they were going to separate, it would be better that way. Having woken up early in the morning, the man sat under a tree and sat there until sunset, constantly thinking about something. Sometimes strange thoughts come to mind, but he quickly forgets them. He is overcome by an irresistible desire to go somewhere, but soon he closes his eyes from a deep sense of lethargy. He dreams of the same dream over and over again, and he's wearing red silk. Who is this woman behind this red silk? She asked him to be quiet and said she wouldn't tell him, after which she laughed very loudly. The dream always ends before this unknown woman appears. The boy told his mother, or the head of the family, that Hekbi must be killed. What if he completely loses his memory and becomes an enemy of the Heck family? With such a cruel character and no memory of who they think he'll aim his sword at? It's true, and his son-in-law is too dangerous. The man sitting next to him wondered if it wouldn't be better to brainwash him first. His head is already completely empty, so the rinsing should be quite successful. The boy, seeing the number of corpses lying around, thought there was another mercenary. They come when he starts to forget. He walked around the perimeter, wondering who it was this time. It could be his sister, his brother-in-law, or perhaps the head of the family. He doesn't intend to die peacefully, but it's very tiring, and the boy looked at the pond where beautiful lilies grew. Hekbi asked him how he was enjoying her treatment. She asked him not to tell anyone about it, as it was a commercial treatment and a trade secret. The girl asked the man to go with her to the market, and he looked at her carefully. He still couldn't comprehend that Hekbi was his own daughter. The girl lay on the bed, unable to even move her arm because she was so tired. She couldn't figure out where she was, or if she was even home. She couldn't remember how she got there. She only remembers how happy she was when she made the pact with her father and set off back. It's unknown how much time has passed since then, or how she ended up here. Hekbi recalled that she had exhausted all her strength and collapsed on the way back. She had said that her last ability was exhausting her, and that the child's body was physically weak. Then she wondered who had brought her here, and whether it had been Hyuk Ki-won. She thought about it with her eyes closed and began to yawn. The girl did not expect that there was a man next to her who, looking at her, smiled and asked how she slept. The girl exclaimed that he had scared her terribly and asked what he was doing there. The boy replied that he was watching, and she asked why he was watching her. The man replied that his condition was now completely stable, and he wanted to see the face of their benefactress. She felt very uncomfortable when this man smiled and suddenly picked her up. He asked why she was trying to get away. He would be very sad if she ran away, and what bad thing her uncle had done to her. The man lifted her as high as he could above his head, and the girl asked her uncle to stop. He, in turn, asked her not to talk like that. He asked her to call him Elder Uncle and smiled, looking into her eyes. He treated her well and was very kind. She was very surprised and couldn't understand what he was saying. The girl's eyes sparkled, because no one had treated her so strangely in a long time. Hekbiyu said that she would call him whatever she wanted, and asked her uncle to let her go to the floor quickly. He began to press her against him again as tightly as he could, and asked if she didn't like it. If she wanted it, he would give it to her, and she could have it. The girl asked what he was talking about, and said that she had asked to be let go. The boy asked if she wanted to take his son with her, and said it was a package deal. Hyuk Ki-won said that perhaps he didn't need him, and that he understood Hyuk Bi-yu. The girl didn't expect to see the boy here. He said it wasn't what she thought, and she couldn't understand why he'd even come here. The boy brought a variety of dishes to the table. The girl devoured everything with gusto, and asked her brother not to misunderstand her. Today, her appetite was simply ravenous, and she couldn't stop. He replied that he understood everything, and that if she ate the entire breakfast without leaving anything behind, then he would forgive her. Hyuk Bi-yu asked if he was telling the truth. The girl smiled and told her brother that it was very good, and she would happily eat it all. How could anyone refuse such delicious food and such variety? The uncle smiled and asked if she knew, and said that they had chicken on their plates, and she had beef. He exclaimed, wiping the food from his cheek, that she was invigorated and that he really liked it. Hyuk Ki-won asked his father to calm down. How could he even say such a thing to her? The girl blushed and wondered if it was true. Where did they find the money for beef? After all, the supplies arriving here shouldn't be so generous. The boy smiled at the girl and said that they sometimes get paid to deal with strange people. Hek Bi-yu became curious and asked if they were getting paid. The boy replied that it was for his father's medication and that they'd been doing this for a long time. Whenever a family member needs help, they call their father. She couldn't understand why this was happening. They kicked him out, claiming he was ill. But they still use his abilities because they're too valuable. As the girl carried basins of water, she thought she hated it. The man told her that she would be the one to do it. She needs to be sent to the infectious diseases ward. What will she do if she doesn't like it and has no other options? She should be grateful that they give her a job. The girl thought that this was just a terrible family of scoundrels. Hyuk Bi-yu looked at the boys and said, "They don't need to do this anymore." Her gaze was full of confidence. Hek Bi-yu exclaimed, rising from her chair, that from now on she would be the head of this place. The girl held her hand to her chest as she spoke. In this fourth regression life, she knows which lottery tickets will be winning. She knows this because she's already lived many lives. The girl asked them to listen to her very carefully, and even rice cakes would fall from the sky. The boys listened attentively, their eyes wide with wonder. The boy shut up the boy who asked her what she was even talking about. He wished he hadn't said that, so as not to upset the girl. The boy smiled at the girl and said that this was very good, and that they were now a family. If she was the head, then they were members who needed to be protected. Isn't this the real purpose of a family? The boy, holding her ear, asked if she would answer their question honestly. The man asked her why she had fainted on the street yesterday. The girl, of course, wasn't expecting such a question, but he continued to talk about how there shouldn't be any secrets from each other in a family. Hyuk Ki-won said that his father always told him not to lie secretly. He stroked her again with his hand, and the girl looked at him in surprise. She couldn't figure out what excuse she could come up with. She couldn't say it was because of some secret ability. Then the boy, still holding the boy's mouth, exclaimed that he was very surprised. He asked why she was lying there, exhausted, on the street. The boy approached the girl and said that perhaps her dad hit her, which is why she was lying on the floor unconscious. His eyes glowed with a red, fiery light, and he asked if she really wanted to tell her uncle to punish her father. Hyuk Bi-yu thought about how she didn't want to become an orphan because of a misunderstanding. The girl exclaimed that nothing had happened, and that her father had said he would go to the market with her. She looked at the boy and said that she was just tired, that's all. Hek Bi-yu didn't take her eyes off him, then wearily closed her eyes again. He closed his eyes thoughtfully and said that, since they were talking about it, his uncle wanted to help her if he could. He explained to the girl, looking her in the eye, that he wanted to become her guardian. Hyuk Bi-yu replied that even if he didn't, she would still treat him if he asked. The man exclaimed that, of course, treatment was important, and he owed it to her mother. Therefore, he had to protect her now, and he was telling the truth. The girl exclaimed that it was a lie, and that if it were true, they would have found her sooner. when they abandoned her in the East Wing. When she worked as a slave to the family, they never looked for her, just like her father had in all 3 of her lives. The boy looked down sadly and said that he couldn't deny that he was very sorry and that it was true. If he had to make up an excuse, he would say that she lived perfectly well in the main house. Then the girl asked if he was talking about her, and the man replied that he was, because her mother had done something for the family. Hekbiyu thought about how little she remembered her mother. She thought about this sadly, staring into space. It's strange that in each life she's heard little about her, as if someone deliberately hid everything. Why would they do that? When she entered this body, she was no longer there. And in her 3rd life, when she finally gained access to information, she had already abandoned her family. The man explained to the girl that this was why he didn't even know she was in the East Wing. How could he have known that? The boy continued the conversation and suddenly asked her to forgive him for everything. Hekbiyu understood that he was suffering from madness. There were probably more days when he was out of it than when he was conscious. After all, he was suffering from such a serious illness. How could he afford to care for a niece who meant next to nothing to him? Hyukbiyu smiled and said she understood. The boy asked the girl if she was upset with him, and she asked him to go and wash up, closing her eyes sadly. Hyukkiwon asked the girl to wait and said that he would prepare warm water for her. The man, closing his eyes, said that in that case, his uncle should get some firewood. They both stood up and headed for the exit, and the girl followed them. The boy mentioned that he was now unemployed, so he should at least do some chores. Hyukkiwon asked him not to destroy anything in that case. He said this because he always uses lightning when he's angry. It's very cruel, he thinks. This concern arose after she helped just once. The boys were very strange people, and it was obvious. Hekbiyu now understood what really happened and told the others so that they would understand her. The boy sat next to the girl near the cherry blossom tree and, looking at her in surprise, asked why she was telling him this. Everyone went outside and started doing chores. The boy chopped wood, and the little boy carried it. He asked his father why he had reacted that way. The man asked him what he was asking about now. Hyukkiwon replied that he was talking about his madness. He placed a red ribbon at the entrance. The madness wasn't over yet. He began to remember and wondered why this could have happened while staring at one spot. It was the question that had been tormenting him all this time. Apparently, it was because of the blood. He wanted to explain to his son why he had this condition. The boy said that this had never happened before, and didn't it seem to him that it was only getting much worse? The man replied that he wasn't sure about that. But, looking into the distance, he said that he would feel better now. In the end, their brilliant head of the family declared that she would cure him no matter what. That's exactly what the eldest uncle said. The girl asked if he wanted his uncle to punish his father. She asked the question and stared at him, waiting for an answer. He again replied that he didn't understand why she was telling him this. The girl replied that she was warning him in advance. The elder uncle might attack him because of the slightest misunderstanding, so he needs to be very careful. If that happens, he'll have to run. She fully understood his character from their first meeting, but she also needs to know when to wait. The boy asked if all this confusion started because she lost consciousness on the way home. The girl replied that he should deal with it as her father. If he had a problem with that, then she asked him to take her home. The man asked why they had moved on to this, and the girl replied that her father had agreed to be her bodyguard. She rather gives him work as her personal warrior, and a warrior must protect the doctor. This is part of his duties. Hekbiyu asked about the matter she'd asked him about earlier. Her father asked if she was talking about going to the market. He explained that there were procedures that had to be followed, so they couldn't go ahead the way she wanted right now. To go outside, you must obtain permission from the manager of the restricted area. He sent a letter to the main building last night, and they'll be able to leave as soon as the invitation arrives. So all that remains is to wait for it and then act. The father asked his daughter why she was looking at him that way. The girl explained that she simply didn't expect him to organize everything so quickly. The man said that it was bad even when he did what she wanted. She told him to do as she said so things would get better. Hekbiyu asked when she had said that, and the man replied that a criminal never remembers his crimes. He seems to be referring to a certain wind mage who threatened his own daughter the first time they met. And she went all the way because she was so nervous. When the girl stood up, her father asked where she was going. Hyukbiyu replied that she was going home. She is finished for today, so she asks him to let her know when he is ready to go to the city, as he promised her. He didn't leave the girl's side, and she looked at him in surprise, wondering why. Her father explained that she had asked him to take her home. He said that he needed her, so he thought he should listen to her. This was a big plus for Hyukbiyu. The man lifted the girl onto his shoulder and carried her through the dense forest to her home. She felt very comfortable perched on his good shoulder. The father explained to his daughter that he would take her on the shortest route in the world, and she suddenly called him Dad as he ran off very fast like the wind. She asked him to wait a little because he was running too fast through the forest thicket so that she could not see anything around. He seemed to fly over the tall trees, only the leaves having time to fall off. The girl called him crazy and said she was only 3 years old. What kind of 3-year-old would ride a high-speed roller coaster? This is just plain crazy. The father ignored her and continued running very fast until he stopped very abruptly. He said he didn't know where she lived. The girl looked down, trying to catch her breath. He wondered if it was okay to go outside the gate with him, and she stood next to a concrete vessel, stirring something in it. The girl was extremely tired, and her hands were constantly slipping, so much so that she couldn't stand it anymore, and it was very difficult for her. Hyuk Ki-won approached her and asked her to give him the thing. Hyuk Bi-yu responded by asking for it back and saying she would do it herself. The boy asked what she could do with her little hands. He asked what she was doing and if she'd gone to bed late again. Hyuk Bi-yu asked what it was like and that she was actually preparing medicine for her uncles. 2 days had passed since her meeting with her father, but there hadn't been a single word from him. Needing something to occupy herself with, she said she'd made some medicine for him, just in case. She reached for her pocket where the medicine was, wondering when he would even get an answer. If he wasn't there tomorrow, she'd have to break into the main building herself. Hyuk Ki-won said he'd continue his chatter and asked her to go rest. He explained to the girl that she was really bad at asking for help, and why she didn't ask for help at all. Why can't she rely on other people? And what makes her do everything herself and suffer from it? When he said this, she looked at him in surprise and her eyes sparkled. He became curious why she was asking, and the boy continued to stir what the girl had been doing until now. She explained that it was because she had never been able to rely on anyone. She had done everything on her own her entire life, and the rest of her lives. In her third life, she barely escaped her family and thought everything would finally work out. But she eventually realized that no matter how capable she was, the world was always cruel to a girl without connections. She remembered when the boy would lean on his hand and say that this is exactly what he liked about the little pharmacist. The girl responded by calling him an idiot, saying that now she was not just a pharmacist, but a doctor. Then the guy laughed again and said that she was the greatest doctor in history treating his incurable disease and the most beautiful girl on the entire continent. The boy explained that she really was very beautiful. In the end, the only person she opened her heart to betrayed her. Remembering this, tears began to flow down her face, and she even used her own life force for the first time. Suddenly, all motivation for work disappeared. The girl turned around and told her brother that if he wanted to do it himself, he should. He asked her to leave it to him and not to worry about anything. Then she brought something else, a lot of it, so he could do his job well. She asked him to grind a variety of roots and dried herbs to make a base for her medicines. The girl watched the boy from the side and thought that the newcomer thought that medicines were easy to prepare. She suddenly looked to the side and thought that she couldn't see her older uncle, and she wondered where he had gone. The boy continued to interfere and then suddenly stopped and explained that his father had gone to meet someone. He left to inform her that he would no longer do the job he had told her about. Indeed, the uncle was already in the city near the small rooms and was looking somewhere into the distance, as if he was looking for something. The boy explained to the girl that he was talking to her about the main building, and she listened attentively. She wanted to get into this large building as soon as possible, so she needed to know as much as possible about it. The main building is located in the Heck family's western wing. Unlike the abandoned eastern wing, of course, that's a slight exaggeration, but it may seem like a small yet very rich and beautiful village. This is quite natural, given the huge number of people living here, from the head of the family to those with direct and indirect family ties. If she'd known he was going to the main building, she would have asked him to check the letter. Heck Bi-yu exclaimed that since he'd said her uncle was going to meet someone, she wondered if he even had any friends. The boy turned to the girl and asked if she knew she was being very rude. Hyuk Bi-yu immediately apologized to him. Hyuk Ki-won said he didn't mean to say he needed to apologize. He was the kind of person who would lose a friend because of his tongue, even if he had one. The girl decided he was too cruel to his father. She asked if they no longer had dealings with these strange people because she had asked them not to. When the boy said yes, she immediately burst out laughing. Hyuk Bi-yu approached him and said that it was simply wonderful and a very good job. Brother didn't need to do it either. Let them use their power for better things, just like their spirit animal. It will be wonderful and simply beautiful. The girl asked the boy where his spirit beast had gone. He asked if she was talking about the lightning beast. Before he could say this, a round, orange, fluffy little animal appeared above his head. He approached and began to chirp and squeak, like a small fluffy bird that had just learned to fly. The bird approached not the boy, but the girl. She immediately hugged her and began rubbing her head against Heck Bi-yu's face. But when it rubbed against the girl, she began to sneeze loudly, and the little animal flew far back. Its feathers tickled the girl's nose. But not even a few seconds passed before he was near her face again, and she started sneezing again. The boy asked the little animal not to bother the girl and to fly to him. Hyuk Bu remarked that his pet seemed to have inherited his great stubbornness. Hyuk Ki-won, turning to the girl, replied that he was not stubborn at all. Hyuk Ba-yu asked the boy if he would remain the same fluffy little ball he was now. Hyuk Ki-won replied that he didn't know. The younger uncle said he wouldn't change as they grew older. He said he'd grow up and become more like an animal. Spiritual beasts that resemble animals from the start are much stronger. Hek Bu was surprised that Heka Yan's spiritual beast was a snake bird, just like the main character of Munchkin. The girl said that her uncle knew much more about spirit beasts than she thought. The boy explained to Hek Bu that his younger uncle had always dreamed of becoming a scientist. She was surprised and asked if he really knew that. How could he become a scientist with such a character? He always insisted he was right and asked not to argue with it, but simply to agree. Hek Bu remarked that this was completely unlike him. Hyuk Ki-won replied that he'd heard about it briefly from his father. He said he'd studied hard with her father for a while because of his first aunt. The girl thought that the father, the man who took his 3-year-old child on a roller coaster ride, also wanted to become a scientist, and this is very surprising. Still, he didn't quite look like a scientist. The boy asked her to stop for now and step away for a moment. He wanted to show the girl something, and they headed in the direction Hyuk Ki-won had called her. Apparently, this was some kind of surprise he had arranged for the girl. They walked through the green thicket and found themselves near a patch of land where a variety of plants grew. The girl was very curious about how it was made. This is the herb garden that he and his father started. The place she went to was too far away. Besides, since the East Wing is abandoned, strange people sometimes show up there. The boy explained that he would transport the herbs as soon as he could. His father said he would bring everything he could get his hands on. Hek Bu knew the East Wing was dangerous. She'd encountered them several times in her past life. But for them to be moved because of her was very surprising. And the girl almost burst into tears from such an act. She remembered the bearded man telling her she had no rights and asking her to get out. And the girl next to her said she heard Hyuk Bu begging again, tearfully. She was caught working in the fields at night. It was the first time she experienced kindness without any malicious intent, from strangers. The girl continued to be very surprised, and looking at this clearing with plants, she immediately thanked the boy. Hyuk Ki-won looked at the girl with a smile, glad that this made her so happy. The smile on her face spoke of a good mood and positive emotions. He leaned toward Hyuk Bu and asked if he realized she was too used to saying thank you. The girl smiled and replied that it wasn't true. While they were talking, a voice came from behind them and said he had found them. This was quite unexpected, as they were the only two there and didn't expect to see anyone else. The boy behind them laughed and said it was hard to imagine them being in a place like that. He'd been looking for them forever since they weren't home. 2 guys appeared in front of them, led by that little scoundrel Hek Dae-vi. The girl wondered why this bastard was here, and those 2 behind him. These 2 boys were official warriors of the Hek family. They walked around with this rascally boy like his bodyguards. Hyuk Dae-vi asked if this was their first time seeing his bodyguards. Unlike them, he had a degree in pharmacology. They know that warriors are required to be introduced to the Hek family's doctors and pharmacists. The girl thought he only received this education thanks to his first aunt's connections. Hyuk Dae-vi pointed his finger at the boys with an angry expression. He asked the bodyguards if they saw those scoundrels. They were the vile and insolent people who had poisoned him just recently. Hyuk Bu and Hyuk Ki-won weren't expecting this turn of events and stared at them. After all, it was this boy who was truly vile and insolent. Using poison against family members can be problematic depending on the circumstances. However, in Hyuk Dae-wi's case, she, a 3-year-old girl, beat him, and admitting it to the family would be a great shame. Besides, the first aunt is someone who values her reputation extremely highly. Even if she knew the truth, she wouldn't resist. And if it hadn't been effective, she definitely wouldn't have done it. She thought he'd hold a grudge and then quietly forget about it. The girl thought he was completely crazy, and Hyuk Dae-vi said that the guys who were with him were obligated to protect him according to their contract. He ordered one of them to get rid of this trash and protect it. The boy was very surprised and asked if he really wanted to get rid of them. The boy was very angry, and turning to the bodyguard said that these were the children of sinners, and that they must be dealt with. And this boy is the son of a madman, and the daughter of a mentally ill person. So why are they hesitating? Such crazy people simply shouldn't exist in this world. Besides, that madman isn't here, so they can easily do it. The girl's sweat dropped when she heard that. If these 2 warriors are introduced by the first aunt, then they are definitely unusual. She knows because she saw them in her past lives. She looked closely at these guys and realized that these were the faces of killers, and nothing would stop them if the boy gave such a command. They really could kill them without even thinking. Hyuk Ki-won asked the girl to stand behind him and walked toward the boys. She asked him if he wanted to fight and asked him not to. The girl grabbed him by the belt with one hand and said that even if he, brother, could not cope with official warriors, especially bodyguards, it was better not to do this. Before she could finish speaking, he, covered in beads of sweat, replied that he knew it, but he went forward anyway. But now he is the only one who can protect her. And the girl was surprised that she had a protector. The boy explained that she was his father's doctor and absolutely needed to be protected. This meant that his father and he were warriors who had to watch over her and protect her. There was no reason to expect father to return, as he had recently gone to the main building. Therefore, the situation was very serious and extremely dangerous. He'll hold out for a while, so he asks her to take the opportunity to call his younger uncle. He'd fallen asleep long ago and should have woken up by now. The girl wondered what would happen if he hadn't woken up yet. The boy suddenly had a fresh idea and handed her a papyrus tied with a red ribbon. Hyuk Ki-won explained that there was one more person. He made it clear to Hekbi-yu that this man was her father, and that they needed to approach him so that he would come to their aid. Meanwhile, the angry boy was already asking his bodyguards why they were standing there and doing nothing. He exclaimed that he had already ordered them to get rid of them. One of the guys lowered his head and closed his eyes, said, "As he says," and began to take his sword out of its sheath. He began to slowly approach the boy and said that this task was not difficult, and he would quickly cope with it. Hyuk Ki-won was already standing, sword at the ready to defend himself, and parried the bodyguard's blow with all his might. The boy was thrown back, landing on his back, not expecting such agility from the boy. The bodyguard was very surprised, and said that for such a small boy, he had quite good skills. But it's a pity that he follows orders and shouldn't give in to the feelings that he just developed for him. Hyuk Ki-won, looking into the eyes of his opponent who wanted to kill him, asked who said that he would give up so easily. The boy's little animal appeared above his head and began to fly as high as possible and make squeaking sounds. When he flew into the sky, there was a bright flash in the form of lightning, and these lightnings began to approach the ground. Bright purple lightning surrounded the enemy and began to fly apart in different directions in the form of a huge, powerful ball. The enemy didn't expect this, and when he saw the spirit beast and the lightning strike, he was simply shocked. After all, it turned out the boy could protect himself and was quite strong, the bodyguard said, looking at him with surprise and interest in his eyes, that it seemed you can't fool blood. Being born unique is an immense injustice. This boy's strength is truly astounding. After that, the bodyguard began to approach the boy again like the wind, and was already right next to him. But Hyuk Ki-won thrust out his sharp long sword, pushing the scoundrel back. Hekbi-yu was extremely worried, and thought that his aura had completely changed. She hoped he would hold out as long as possible until help arrived. This scoundrel is seriously fighting now, and it's not good. He approached the boy like lightning and tried to strike. He was as vicious and furious as a tiger. The boy managed to hit him right on the cheek with the tip of his sword, and the girl immediately called out to her brother. Hyuk Ki-won asked her not to worry about her and to leave quickly. Hekbi-yu began to worry even more, because even if she wanted, this bastard would bring another warrior with him. Hyuk Dae-vi grinned very evilly and said that this time she would not run away, calling her a brat and making a malicious face. The girl asked him if he knew that these fighters couldn't attack doctors and pharmacists, and that it was a family rule. Hyuk Dae-wi responded by saying that, as long as he was discovered, everything would be fine. And besides being a doctor, she's a complete idiot with no education and a very stupid girl. Hyuk Bi-yu thought about how he wanted to play and grimaced mischievously. She exclaimed, looking at this scoundrel, that he never learns from his mistakes. Was he really ready to suffer an even worse defeat than last time? And he was the stupid boy, not she the stupid girl. Hyuk Dae-vi was absolutely furious and asked his bodyguard to stop her from doing something stupid. He informed her that she had the ability too, and the boy told the gentleman that he understood. The girl exclaimed, directing a stream of water from her vessel towards the enemy, that it was too late and called them idiots. A torrent of water began to pour toward the villains, surrounding them on all sides. It was as if they were trapped. The bodyguard did not expect such a turn of events and began to feel the power of water from all sides. The boy, too, along with him. They started screaming as the current of water lifted them higher and higher. They were simply shocked to find themselves in this whirlpool and finding it hard to breathe. Hekbi-yu, as expected, was draining her stamina by diagnosing multiple people at once. At her best, she could detain a dozen people. Since they still don't know about her ability, she just needs to hold them off for a while. And the girl continued to hold the vessel in her hands and release streams of water, blue and transparent. The girl told the gentleman that one wrong move and he could have a stroke. If his left ankle broke again, he would be finished. so it was best to take care of it while it was still in good condition. When the bodyguard heard this, he became very scared and became even more angry at the girl, saying various terrible words to her. But they couldn't talk much because they were caught in the powerful current of the whirlpool. Hekbi told the boy he was suffering from childhood obesity and called him an idiot. Suddenly, Hyuk Ki-won appeared behind the girl and warned her to be careful. She immediately turned her head in his direction. 10 minutes later, her father was sitting on the roof, gazing thoughtfully into the distance. His face was serious, and there was a strange glint in his eyes. In front of him were the guys who were looking at the clearing with plants that he and Hyuk Ki-won had planted. The girl asked him if he was crazy. He could fly so fast with a child like her, and she could measure it. Hekbi-yu's father told her that he hadn't run so fast so she wouldn't get hurt. The girl asked him to shut up immediately, as he needed to be severely punished for this. He's even more mentally unhealthy than his brother, whether he realizes it or not. The man sitting on the roof was thinking about just that. He heard footsteps behind him, and the boy asked if he'd come to see. Of course, it was his beloved brother. He stood over him, and the man turned toward him, not expecting his arrival. Still, he needed to say, "Nice to meet him." The boy told Mr. Hekbi that he was honored to see his beautiful face. The man asked him to stop spouting nonsense and gave him a sideways, contemptuous glance. He asked her to stop testing his patience and say what he wanted, calling him brother. They teased each other out of great brotherly love. The boy was pleased and surprised that Hekbi remembered him. The last time they met, he hadn't recognized him, his younger brother. There is only one explanation for this, and the girl stood next to the boy, looking closely at the roof. Meanwhile, the man said that his younger brother had come, most likely because he was worried about his daughter. He asked what he could do, since she was his daughter too. He smiled and said that he had even given her a name. Then the boy asked if she was his brother's daughter, and he simply fell silent, raising his hand up. A thin veil of smoke appeared above their heads. The man said that his younger brother had come because he was worried about his daughter. Then the brother replied that that was exactly what he'd said at the time. The brother immediately laughed and replied that that was exactly how it had been. He grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and told him he only remembered useless trifles. He should remember his daughter, not him. He called him his pathetic, worthless brother who became a father, more terrible than a beast. He thought that he would at least take minimal measures and continued to hold him by the scruff of the neck, looking straight into his eyes. The boy said this with a sly smile, saying that he didn't expect him to leave the little girl, his daughter, to die. How much dirt she must have seen. How much the younger brother and his wife loved each other so much that they abandoned everything and ran away in the name of their love. Not only had he forgotten his wife, whom he loved very much, but the boy, who was being held by the scruff of the neck, asked what he could do since she was his daughter, whom he didn't even remember. If that's the case, it's best to treat her as if she weren't his daughter. He only promised to help this child with all the strength he could muster. Then the boy asked him if that was enough. The man remained sitting there, looking sadly into the distance. The brother continued to hold him by the scruff of the neck and asked if she had told him that she had improved his condition. Judging by how angry his brother was, she really was his daughter. But even so, he'd still forget everything. He wondered who would be the biggest loss. Sometimes keeping a certain distance, for example with strangers, is the best option. The brother said that was a very perverted way of saying he wanted to see his 3-year-old daughter. The other immediately gave him a sideways glance. It's serious that his younger brother is trash, and he sincerely hopes he'll regret it. His older brother said he now sees that he's clearly improved. The man explained that he had come here only because he had simply stopped seeing the child who had previously come and gone so often. That was the only reason, and there was no other reason. The boys heard someone say that he had finally found them. Just imagine that they were in such a place, and he had been looking for them for ages, since they still weren't home. They stood in a green clearing, and the boy asked if it was really So-ran's son in front of them. The two brothers continued to sit on the roof and watch the proceedings from a distance. The streams of water pouring from Hekbi vessel seemed to rise to the sky. The brothers watched the proceedings, and the younger brother asked the older one if he would intervene. The older brother then asked the younger one to allow him to speak clearly. If he interferes, there will be nothing left for him. Then his brother will take all the goodies from their little fairy. He asked his brother what he was going to do, and said he would count to 3. The older brother continued to sit, gazing thoughtfully at the clearing. Meanwhile, the bodyguard continued to fight with the boy, whom he hit with his fist and sent flying far back. His little animal also turned over and began to squawk, and the feathers of this round little one flew in all directions. The bodyguard was already next to the boy and, raising his sword above his head, exclaimed that he was still too far from perfection. Hekbi thought about using her ability again. She really hoped it would work and asked the vessel to help her one more time. Whole streams of water began to splash out of her vessel and rise higher and higher above the girl's head. The streams of water began to approach the bodyguard and his opponent, spreading thicker and more furiously, like rivers. The girl directed the main flow towards the bodyguard, who had already approached the boy and raised his saber over his head. She exclaimed that she couldn't let this affect him too. She was very worried about Hyuk Ki-won. One of the boys had already seen her using her vessel and a powerful stream of water, and stared at her with his angry eyes. Sweating, Hyuk Bi-yu realized she was in trouble, and he was heading straight for her. She decided she needed to try another approach, but she can't let Hyuk Ki-won die. She can't leave him alone with 2 bodyguards. The boy had told her recently that his father and he were warriors who had to protect her, and he was ready to stand up for her life. Finally, she had someone on her side, so she couldn't just retreat. The bodyguard was already behind her, raising his sword as high as he could. The girl closed her eyes and thought about how painful the sword strike was. She began to run faster and faster away from the scoundrel. Hyuk Bi-yu decided that she shouldn't close her eyes, but rather scream as loudly as possible. And suddenly, a man appeared in front of her. He knocked his opponent over and immediately grabbed the girl in his arms, wondering if she was hurt. He was already holding his daughter in his arms, a light white haze swirling beneath her as if she were on a cloud. The girl looked at him with great surprise and asked why her dad was here. He said that 2 warriors were fighting with a small child, and it was simply terrible. How could such a thing even happen? And how could they not be ashamed? Hyuk Bi-yu asked her father how he'd gotten there in the first place. The man stared at her and said she just nearly lost her life. He explained to the girl that she should have at least called for help. Then someone would have come to protect her. He was very surprised that she tried to deal with such formidable opponents on her own, and that it could cost her her life. Hyuk Bi-yu looked at her father with sadness in her eyes and replied that no one would help her, so she didn't call for help. Her father asked her why she thought that and why no one would help her. The girl blushed, closed her eyes, and said she'd never had anyone. No one would ever stand up for her, and she had to cope with everything alone. Her father pulled the girl aside and, looking into her eyes, told her that she had him now. He came here specifically to protect her from these scoundrels who dared to attack children together. He's reliable in following orders, and returning home safely is his first priority. He was ordered to accompany her and report back immediately when a reply arrived, so he even acted as her messenger. Although he has memory problems, you can always count on him to keep his promise. The father approached the girl and again asked if she was hurt. Hyuk Bi-yu wondered why he was so insistent on checking. She had to give him back, and the girl, holding her face with her hand, blushed and smiled. She was very pleased that her father was still worried about her. Hyuk Bi-yu explained to her father, after he had already let her go to the green grass, that she was fine so he could let her go. She urgently needs to go to her little brother, Hyuk Ki-won. The boy fell unconscious as soon as his dad came to the rescue. He must have been very tired, and the man looked at him with sadness and regret in his eyes. After all, he had so diligently protected the girl with all his might. The father looked at his daughter and said, "I'm here, but what's her reaction anyway?" She could have admired him more or praised him. Looking into her eyes, he asked if she wanted to heal the one who had so brilliantly saved her. Hyuk Bi-yu, having listened attentively to her father, became thoughtful. Look at him, trying to get his fill of his daughter's life for free. The girl said she was very sorry, but she didn't feel that way. They'll have to achieve something more significant. Before them stood an opponent holding a sharp sword. The girl immediately clung to her father in fear, and the man looked closely at the angry guy. Hyuk Bi-yu also looked at him and asked her father if he would catch him again. The girl's father explained that there was simply no need for it. But suddenly, a young boy appeared, glaring angrily at the bodyguard, who was lying on the ground as he approached. He laughed and asked to play with him, preparing to attack. Why did this gentleman uncle come here? The boy remarked that he looked familiar and peered at the bodyguard. He lifted his head to look at his face. He recognized the man as a servant who had once served him. No wonder he glared at his son so angrily. When the boy said this, he laughed and said that in that case, he'd start with a massage from his old master. The bodyguard, lying face down on the floor, asked him to wait a bit. He started crying and screaming, and the girl and her father watched intently. Hyuk Bi-yu thought that perhaps this was what high-frequency massage was like in this world. Meanwhile, a small animal flew up to them, flapping its wings and making a certain sound. Small, transparent tears glistened in the bird's eyes. The little animal flew toward the girl and began squeaking right above her head. Hyuk Bi-yu looked at it, saying it was okay. When the girl found herself next to Hyuk Ki-won, who was lying in bed with his arm bandaged, she said that only his wrist was broken, but otherwise there were only minor bruises. He didn't have any significant injuries. The boy asked if he had a broken wrist and said he just lacked training. The girl remarked that Ki-won was only 9 years old and that his opponent was a trained warrior. The man exclaimed that she was simply a princess and that if he were in his place, he would do just that. He would have instantly thrown the sword aside and pierced his hand with lightning. Now she understands why her brother lost. Father is the kind of man who would lose even his only friend because of his big mouth. Before he could finish speaking to the girl, the bird rose into the air and began chirping again. The man remarked that this divine beast was a real crybaby. Then the girl asked if he had another divine beast. Her father replied that of course he did, but it was too stoic, so it wasn't very good. Divine beasts will certainly resemble their masters. Hekbi looked at the man thoughtfully, so her brother was just as sensitive too. The girl said she'd never seen him cry. Or maybe he's just been putting up with it all for a long time. She sat next to the bed where the wounded boy lay, looking at him thoughtfully. She approached her uncle and said that it was not worth raising a child in such a way that he could not even cry. It was too cruel and wrong. If he keeps doing this, the boy won't be able to cry even if he really wants to. And he needs to let out all his emotions so it doesn't negatively affect his health in the future. The boy listened to the girl and put his hand on the head of the boy who lay wounded in bed with his eyes closed. Hekbi thought about how she now had a boss to deal with. She turned to her father and asked if he had received a reply. The man said he had arrived, and she asked what it said. He immediately thought about it, remembering. The father explained that he said he couldn't give permission right away, so he had to go to him personally. Hekbi listened to the man and said that in that case, they should go to the main building right now. The sun was still too high in the sky, and the Hekdevi operation had clearly ended in failure, and they had won this battle. The girl thought that after everything that had happened, it was now her turn to counterattack this scoundrel. The man sitting next to me said he'd go too, since he'd already left work. He said this with a smile and a hand on the back of his head. And now the guys found themselves on the street, among a crowd of people who were being led by strong, thick ropes. These people were bound, and their hands were tied too. Oh my God, how shameless is this, and what is this? Is the man in front by any chance the Dark Commander? And why is he tied up anyway? The girl realized that they were leading that scoundrel boy who attacked them, and his 2 bodyguards, and she called him an idiot and asked if he was ashamed now. When the boy lifted the girl onto his neck, he asked if their little fairy was feeling well. The girl replied that, by the way, she was curious why her uncle had left in the middle of work. People around her were asking if their parents were in prison. That's because he knew those guys would invade. The eldest uncle had built some kind of lightning barrier around the house. Hyukbi wondered if Kiwon's words were true, and he'd gone to tell her he was leaving. So, was it okay to leave during such conversations? The boy replied that since he was leaving anyway, he might make some noise. The little girl will take care of her older uncle and brother. The boy asked his younger brother to say hello to their wet nurse. The boy turned away after these words and said that this was all absolute nonsense. Before he could even move away or take a single step, his brother's foot was already on his back, and he, with the girl in his arms, kicked him with all his might. His brother turned to him and asked him what he was doing, looking at him with surprise. The boy then replied that if he wanted to be treated, he had to behave and called him a freeloader. To ensure proper treatment, their niece must feel well. He asked if his brother understood, and the brother simply looked at him intently. Then he turned to his brother and asked what kind of flattery he wanted from him. He stared at him, waiting for an answer. The brother continued to hold the child in his arms, and looking him intently in the eyes, asked him to forget about it and just go. Hyukbi couldn't figure out what was wrong with them and decided they were strange. She'd noticed something odd about their behavior and actions for a long time. Meanwhile, the guys leading their bound captives walked ahead of them. The main building is truly large, and they've been walking for a long time, and they still haven't arrived. This means that the time when Hyukdevi feels shame increases significantly, and the girl decided that this makes her feel very good. Rumors should have spread through the main building by now. They've probably even reached the eldest aunt, and that's absolutely wonderful. The boys heard someone screaming, and the man being held on both sides called out to Dr. Duwan. He asked if he was okay. The man was furious and wondered why Hyukbi was there. He wasn't even cured of his madness, but he showed up at the main building, and how could he still have the nerve to do that? The crazy killer wants to kill someone again. The man continued to hold the girl in his arms and asked what he was carrying now, since he had come here with a proposal. The man again asked him not to talk nonsense, and exclaimed that the restrictions imposed on him were so strong that he could not get out on his own. He continued to shout and point his finger at the man, who pretended not to care and walked up to the girl. Suddenly, he said he remembered and began to approach the old man who had been shouting so loudly across the street. He pointed at him and said that he was the doctor who had treated him 3 years ago. He stuck all the needles into his neck and then ran away because he started growling a little. The man asked who it was that ran away and whether he was actually going to kill him. How could he make such a fuss over a small discharge and no one die from it? The man laughed and said that even Hekbi was here. He really was interfering in everything. They're determined to turn the entire family into a wasteland. and he asks them to finally understand the reality of their situation. They're just ticking time bombs. The man, still angry, exclaimed, turning to the boys again, that no one could heal them. Isolation was the only way to prevent them from harming anyone. Those who live in the East Wing are treated very poorly, even if they are from the main line of the family. Moreover, since the three brothers were the cause of all the troubles, when they fell ill, their reputation in the eyes of others worsened greatly. Everyone considered them crazy and very strange people. They whispered behind their backs and said all sorts of nasty things about them. For them, these three brothers were also an object of fear. Or perhaps the shame of a family cursed with incurable illnesses. Hyuk-bi-yu knows it's all true, but they're crossing a line and starting to get really annoying. Suddenly, the girl addresses the man as father. She asked if he could do something about this man, for example, with a strong wind. The father explained to the girl that attacking a family member with the ability would be considered a crime. The girl was very surprised that he even remembered that. But unexpectedly, her father said he would listen to her. He meant that he was still using the power of the wind that his daughter had spoken of, and a whole stream of powerful wind was directed towards the villain. The man exclaimed that a very strong wind had picked up and nothing could be done about it. This wind was completely natural and had nothing to do with him. After the father listened to his daughter, he turned to her and asked if he had earned at least a few points. When he said this, the girl immediately smiled, closing her eyes and blushing a little. Hyuk-bi-yu continued to smile and said that it was indeed quite good, which surprised her father greatly. After all, she usually ignored him and wasn't surprised by anything. The boy, listening to their conversation, remarked that it had been fun and asked if they would continue on their way. Hyuk-bi-yu told her uncle that he'd said they simply needed to hand over Hyuk-dae and the warriors to the manager. The boy laughed and exclaimed that it was true and that he'd probably like it. He will clearly be beaming with joy, and they meant, of course, that it will be just the opposite. When the guys entered the room, they were greeted, namely by Mr. Hyuk-bi-won and Mr. Hyuk-bi-hu. The guy sitting at the desk, pen in hand, said that the patients coming all this way had created quite a mess. They'd run away, so why had they come back? The guy replied that he'd gone out for a short walk. He really angered the man sitting at the table, who asked him to stop immediately. Why are they bothering a man who's so busy? So that the boy would remind this man about the letter, and he would understand that he was talking about an exit request. When the man heard about the letter, he took it out and showed it to the man. He asked them to decide for themselves whether they were leaving or not. If they leave and disappear forever, the head of the family will only be happy. The girl listened attentively to their conversation. The boy answered this scoundrel that he didn't care, and he grabbed his head and asked where the broken man was going. The boy asked if they really didn't care, or if they were just used to it. The father continued to hold his daughter in his arms and look at him sideways. The girl, moving closer to her father's ear, asked him if he could lift her up above his head right now. The father immediately complied with his daughter's request and lifted the girl up. Hyuk-bi-yu immediately took out her vessel of clear water and began pouring it over the scoundrel's head. He certainly didn't expect this, and his men were simply shocked, too. The man asked what it was, and the girl said she was now going to speak out. She approached this scoundrel and asked, looking sternly into his eyes, who he even thought he was here, and who he was to talk to people like that. The man then asked her in return who she was. The girl explained that she was the daughter of the man he had called Broken. He is Kamba-rin himself, the manager of the 6th grade, and the girl said that she knows him very well. She knows he's the manager of the Kamba-rin restricted area. For someone to manage a restricted area while simultaneously despising those within it is simply outrageous. He tormented her throughout her entire life simply because she was a withdrawn child. She is well aware that he is actually Kam Tae-han's son and the son-in-law of the Ran family. She smiled slyly right in his face and exclaimed that his gambling debt amounted to approximately 300 gold pieces. The man was simply shocked when he heard the girl's statement. Could it really be she who lived on the 2nd floor of the house with the red roof? Hyuk-bi-yu continued to explain to him that he had not yet been caught there, but she could write the letter herself, and then he would see what would happen. She was already right in front of this scoundrel's face and exclaimed, looking contemptuously into his eyes, that she could give a hint to his wife, Mrs. Ran Jin. When the man heard this, he was completely shocked and his face changed. He laughed and exclaimed that it was too early in the morning to hear such nonsense, and if she was done, then let her go. Hyuk-bi-yu simply asked her not to insult her father and uncle either. The man, already beside himself with rage, began to clench his jaws and say that he would not just leave it like that. The girl's father smiled and exclaimed that there hadn't been a day when this guy's caustic words hadn't left a bad taste in his mouth. But this time was simply the most amazing. The uncle asked the little girl how she even knew he was cheating on her. Hyuk-bi-yu replied that she wouldn't tell because it was a trade secret. The girl thought to herself that she never forgot a grudge. In her third life, she had trampled him thoroughly, and that was simply amazing. Just let him try to quarrel with her again, and then he'll be in trouble. Bound bodyguards and a boy appeared in the hallway. The girl asked her uncle, pointing at them, what they should do with them. The uncle chuckled and said that they should have handed it over to the manager, but he ran away. He turned to the girl and asked if he should just leave them there. After all, trash belongs in the trash can, and the girl exclaimed that that was a very good idea. Uncle immediately laughed, and Hekbiyu advised them to go back. But suddenly, she turned to her father and uncle. She asked the two of them to sit down and explained that she had something to tell them. Her uncle and father immediately squatted down to be the girl's height and listened to her. They began to listen to her attentively, and Hekbiyu asked why they remained silent when they were insulted. She remarked that they were both too ignorant in such matters and asked if they knew about it at all. Then and now, if she hadn't intervened, they would have turned a blind eye. But now, it's impossible to allow that to happen. The girl tried to explain to her father and uncle that patients should never give up. She asked them not to get angry or lazy. The men listened attentively to the girl, as if they had done something wrong and couldn't tell her otherwise. Hyuk-biyu thought they didn't understand what was wrong. Then one of them agreed with her and said that if the princess said so, then they would certainly obey her. The girl asked her uncle to stop brushing them off like that and said that it was a very bad habit, continuing to scold them. She explained that the patient's desire to fight is crucial for treatment. When the patient gives in, their condition rapidly deteriorates. Humiliation is generally hereditary. The things her father and uncle left behind would stick to her and her brother Kiwon, a stigma that haunted her endlessly, even after her father's death. Everyone described her as the child of a prisoner, as well as the daughter of a mental patient. They also said she was the disgrace of the Heck family. The girl realized that the same thing awaited her brother Kiwon. She explained all this to her father and uncle, who continued to listen attentively. Hyuk-biyu looked into the eyes of these two and asked if this was what they wanted. That's why they all needed to change. Dad says he doesn't care because he has no memories left. But she asks him to consider at least part of their agreement. The man looked her in the eyes, and the girl continued to say that even a share of responsibility would be enough. The father stroked the girl's head with his hand and said that he understood what she meant and that he would try to improve. The uncle also stroked the girl's head and exclaimed with a smile, calling her a princess, that he had realized a lot. The man took the girl in his arms and with a smile on his face told her that they should try to change, because now at least there was some hope. They continued to hold the girl in their arms and she asked, if that was the case, to come back quickly. She felt very uneasy coming here. Her father asked if he should use some fresh air. The father laughed and said that their little girl knew how fast Daddy was. Hekbiyu was seriously scared because she remembered that roller coaster when Daddy had rushed through the forest like lightning. She grabbed the boy and, with beads of sweat on her cheeks, explained that she didn't want to fly. The man, on the other hand, realized that she must have really enjoyed flying. Suddenly, their attention was drawn to something approaching them from the side, and it was a stream of blue, transparent water. They weren't expecting it, and a powerful stream of water began to push them back. The man grabbed the girl and hugged her as tightly as he could, stepping away. Before them stood this scoundrel, wielding a sharp pike. He was the husband of Bae Sung-hyun's third aunt. As he approached the boys, the man exclaimed, still holding his weapon, that the rumors were true. The boy, smiling, called him an uninvited guest. Bae Sung-hyun asked how they dared disobey the head of the family's orders and leave the restricted area. Rumors were circulating in the main building that he'd kidnapped Davy and was abusing him. He kept blaming the boy. The man asked him if he was even in his right mind and called him a shameless scoundrel. The boy remarked that this was becoming quite problematic. Sun-hyun began to approach them with a weapon and exclaimed that he would definitely deal with them today. The man continued to hold the girl in his arms and asked the princess not to worry. She was surprised when he tossed her high above his head and asked what he was doing. The girl flew very high, as if into the very sky, and she was scared. She didn't understand why he was doing this and started screaming. At this point, the brother laughed and said that if he dropped her, he was dead. His laughter echoed throughout the area, and the girl screamed in fear as she fell. She flipped over several times in the air and found herself back in her father's arms. It was very fast and swift, and the fear in her eyes never ceased. She called it madness and said he called her a princess, but it was all a lie. Who in this life throws around princesses anyway? The man said that he caught her, she was not hurt, so why is her face so pale? Hyuk-biyu replied that the problem was the toss itself. It looked like today wouldn't be boring at all. The girl was still flushed and nervous after such a long and high flight. It was definitely a roller coaster ride. When the man took her in his arms and walked forward as quickly as possible, his path was blocked by a huge, powerful tree. He approached with his sharp sword the long, thick roots of the tree, which began to reach out to envelop and strangle them. The boys didn't expect the monster tree to appear in front of them, and the man behind it. He said he didn't think he'd take any unnecessary action. The man with glasses said he didn't know what they were planning, but that was enough. Hek Bi-yu realized it was the second aunt's son, Hek Yi-hong. Meanwhile, Bae Sung-hyun had already approached his opponent with his sharp spear and began to raise it above his head. He swung it in different directions, and the boy very skillfully dodged the many blows that rained down on him. He asked him to stop dodging like a rat and to fight him instead. Then the boy greeted his son-in-law. He was suddenly attacked by his son-in-law, so what could be more fair and just? The man rose above his head and, grabbing a weapon, began to approach again. The girl's father, assessing the situation, said that this would be his death. Someone's death would prevent him from leaving, so he would restrain himself. Hek Ye-hong looked at the fight again and asked the man to immediately stop all this chaos. The boy replied that he was actually fighting. Mr. Bi-wan had no reason to be here, but he did have her. The man said that he had lived long enough to be completely misunderstood, and the girl also looked towards Hek Ye-hong. She remembered this man who was the owner of the plant ability and the son of the second aunt. She thought that the appearance of this man meant that she herself would soon come and that this was very bad. Before she had time to think about it, a woman appeared not far from them and asked the boys to stop immediately. The woman remarked that such vulgarity demonstrated a complete lack of dignity in front of the servants. The girl thought that this was Hyuk Bi-won's rival, whom she must surpass someday. This woman is the first aunt, and her name is Hyuk Ha-ran. She just pestered them, and she expected this turn of events. Her grandmother and current head of the Hek family, Hek Mo-ran, gave birth to 5 sons and 3 daughters. You can see the eldest son, Hek Ran, who always holds a large open fan in his hands and grins maliciously. Also twins, who became the eldest and second daughters, Hyuk Ha-ran and Hyuk Hae-ran. Also the second son, Hyuk So-ha, whom she also imagined in front of her, and he was holding an already folded fan in his hands. The third son, Hyuk Bi-won, was also before her eyes, holding a long, sharp sword in his hands. A small green twig hung in his mouth. The third daughter, whose name was Hek Gi-ra, looked into the distance, simply clenching her fist. The fourth son of Hek Bi-hu, who was the girl's father and was always a very serious person. And finally, the fifth son, Hek Bi-ran, who also appeared before her eyes. Of these, the eldest son, Hyuk Ran, and second daughter, Hyuk Hae-ran, died, and the second son, Hyuk So-ha, suddenly disappeared. Of the remaining sons and daughters, Hyuk Ha-ran wields the most power. Meanwhile, the 2 bodyguards were also still tied up, and that evil boy who always bullied Hyuk Ki-won was also tied up along with them. And the man continued to point his sharp spear and, towering above everyone, in the embrace of the tree, approached the boy. The tree gripped him tightly and brought him down to the ground. When the man landed, he asked his daughter-in-law, who was standing before him, what it all meant. The woman replied that she wanted to ask about that. How dare the little warrior even talk to her, she added, looking at the man who was lying with his chest on the ground, that if he didn't want to be punished later, then he should know his place. When the woman spoke out, she turned to the boy and said that this concerned him too. She approached Hyuk Bi-won and explained that she had asked him to restrain himself and not run around like a colt. The woman, looking into his eyes, said that he hadn't changed a bit. Hyuk Bi-won replied that she was right, and they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He said in surprise that her skin hadn't aged at all, and asked where she was drinking blood from. And besides, she was talking very brazenly. The woman told the boy that it was rare that she saw her brother with a hole in his head. She gave him a spiteful, contemptuous look. The girl listened to all this and looked closely at the woman. She thought that this was the real power in the Hexaron family, a possessor of herbal powers like Hek Ye-hong, and also a doctor and pharmacist who is among the top 3 in the Hek family. They say that it was she who raised Hek Ye-hong in place of his deceased second aunt. The boy continued to hold the girl in his arms, and she wondered why everyone was making so much noise and not saying a word to her dad. He'd made a lot of enemies when he was sane. Who is this woman? And the girl explained to the man that she was her father's first aunt, his older sister. When he heard this, he immediately thought about it, listening carefully to the girl. In fact, they were completely different, and she looked much worse than he did. Could this really be her sore spot? And the woman exclaimed that he had absolutely no manners. She wondered why this idiot was there, and her expression changed. Then the boy started approaching her and said he would definitely explain everything. Since his sister would ask for every detail anyway, he'd better tell her everything at once. He asked if she was interested in why they were here. The woman asked him to leave and said she didn't want to hear anything from him. Then he asked if she would change her mind. He continued to smile, and when he came close to his sister, he said that he had come to tell her something. She was surprised and asked what exactly he wanted to tell her, grimacing with hatred towards him. The man said, looking into her eyes, that Hek the pig had hit him. Her little brother was in great pain. As he spoke, he folded his arms across his chest. The woman asked what exactly Daviji had done. The boy continued to explain that the man had hit him and his son, after which he even hit his beloved niece. And that was too much. The girl thought that in fact she hadn't been hit, but pretending that yes, it was okay, and she could play along with him. Hyuk Bi-yu decided she needed to secretly injure herself. The long branches of the thick, evil tree were already approaching the bound boys. Apparently, it was the power of this treacherous woman. The two bodyguards and the boy were seriously scared when the powerful branches were already near their necks. They began to tell his mother that it was a complete lie. In fact, his maternal uncle had kidnapped him and was threatening him. The warriors tried their best to save him, but they were no match for the mad uncle. The boy thought he was making a very strong case. Another man joined him, and he was dragged here by force, not given a chance to resist. He continued to beg his mother to believe her and exclaimed, shedding tears, that he was absolutely innocent. The boy clapped his hands and said, looking at the boy, that he had simply amazing acting, and this was a complete injustice. Then the woman, looking at the man, asked if her son was lying. The brother responded by asking his sister if she thought something was strange. He explained to the woman that he was currently going through a period of insanity. If he were truly insane, he would never have entered the main building. But her son could not be fine either. But look how he looks now, and he has started to get much better. The illness that the sister, who considered herself the best in the Heck family, could not cope with, finally began to pass. The boy leaned over the woman and asked his sister not to underestimate her younger brother. He came close to her ear and said that if he became more serious even for a little while, her son would definitely die, even if he didn't argue with him. And what about Bi-hu? Wouldn't it have been easier to kill him when he didn't even realize it? The girl was holding a brown ball of something in her hands. She asked her brother if he had proof, and he said, of course he did. If you'd like, you can check the gate logs or the dog holes. But there's no need to go far. It's simply necessary to put pressure on certain employees, and that's all. Heck Bi-yu wondered if there really was any evidence. They probably erased them, and most likely, they carefully cleaned up after themselves. If it all comes down to proof, there's no telling how it will turn out or how it will end. But the girl's father suddenly snapped his finger and said it was here. They are contractually obligated to protect him for life. It was as if he were holding a recording of the conversation that had taken place in that situation. The boy then went on to say that in order to protect him, they would have to get rid of them. The bodyguards were very surprised at that moment. But don't they know the laws of their home? A warrior should never attack a doctor or pharmacist? He then asked in response, what's the matter? No one has discovered anything yet. What are they even saying? And did the Black Commander really attack the child? The girl was very surprised when she realized that the wind could store voices, and that this was something incredible. Is this wind ability recognized by the Imperial Palace? So this is the perfect proof at this time. It's just incredible, and everything just falls into place, thanks to the fact that my father just presented such evidence. But this was not why she had prepared the poison, and the girl, squeezing the brown ball in her hands, decided to add the finishing touch. When Hyuk Bi-yu's father looked at her, she asked him not to panic and said that she was actually completely fine. But her face was already a different color, and her father looked at her in fear. Suddenly, she started coughing, and the boys turned to look at her, confused as to what was happening. The girl continued to cough up bright streams of scarlet blood, drawing attention to herself. She clasped her hands to her lips, from which droplets of blood were dripping. The boys were simply stunned by this turn of events, and when they saw the blood, they couldn't understand what was happening to the girl. Hyuk Bi-yu tried to tell her father, while no one was listening, that she had already explained to him that it would be okay, but she couldn't understand what was wrong with his face, or whether he was truly so worried about her. The man hugged the girl to his chest, terrified. His brother ran up and asked why he was standing there like a statue. He asked for a doctor to be called here immediately. Was there really no doctor here? He asked someone to come to her quickly. The man said that it was poison, and, clenching his fist, said that everyone understood this perfectly well. He asked them to heal her immediately and save her at all costs. Otherwise, he would kill everyone here. As soon as he said this, he immediately grabbed one of them by the shoulder. A poisoning that causes black, mold-like spots to appear. No doctor in a black house knows this toxin, and it's called Ha Jong Han. It was Hek Haran who invented it, and its formula and antidote are known only to her descendants. The girl was in very serious condition, and spots were appearing on her face. There were more and more of them, and she pointed to the side. Everyone immediately looked at the person she was pointing at, wondering if her child had really given this girl such poison. Hyuk Bi-won was indeed telling the truth, but as she knew, this little girl was already sick. The girl wondered what her aunt would do in this situation. Her son would definitely not get out of this now. Heck Bi-yu told her father and uncle that everything was fine. If no one could cure her, she could use her regeneration, In other words, the Black Commander is already finished, and she's asking for him to be treated fairly. Who even allowed him to attack her? At that moment, the boy pulled a round, brown ball out of his pocket. He asked her to bet that her family didn't have one. Third life, and now she calmly endures family relationships, and then, again, something is wrong in her life. This fat pig, and he can't stop starting fights. Since she's 6, that means it's okay. The girl held a green twig in her hands and thought that nothing could be done if the first ant hated her so much. He's probably jealous. And the boy said, she doesn't even know what she's looking at. But she can spot bird droppings if she tries hard enough. Let her try learning with such an empty head like hers. Hyuk Dae-wi never tired of annoying her, bragging about Ha Jung-han every time. And every time she found herself in this situation, Hek Bi-yu continued to cough and said that everything was better, but it was very painful. She collected all the information and experimented on her own body in order to quickly destroy this Ha Jung-hong. The main ingredient is a blue crane tail feather, which must be mixed with the venom of a deadly snake. The girl immediately thanked the boy for the information and said that his huge mouth had finally told her what she needed. Now she knew the formula for Ha Jung-hyun and the antidote. Hyuk Dae-vi was already lying face down on the floor and began coughing violently. He called out to his mother for help, then rose to his feet and began running for the door. What's it like to be poisoned by your own favorite toxin? And the girl called him a pig. She exclaimed that he deserved it and laughed. Hek Bi-yu asked that scoundrel how he dared to mess with her. Her gaze was sad, but she knew that she had finally put this scoundrel who had previously bullied her in his place. She'd heard that as soon as Hyuk Dae-vi had recovered, he'd tried to find her again. But she'd already abandoned her family by then. The revenge had worked, though not as happily. Truth be told, perhaps she was a little envious. When you're down, at least you can go to your parents, and she had nowhere to go.